The rifle cracked across her jaw before she could raise her hands. Lena Carter hit the dirt hard, tasting copper and dust, while her uncle's boot scraped closer through the barn shadows. 20 years old, and she'd never known a day without his fists. The ranch that should have been hers had become her cage. She was bracing for the next blow when a voice cut through the darkness. Low, calm, deadly, certain. That's enough. A stranger stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the failing light, and something in his stillness made her uncle's hand freeze mid-swing. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, hit that like button and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's begin. The stranger didn't move, didn't raise his voice, didn't need to. Lena pushed herself up on one elbow, her vision swimming, blood warm on her lip. Through the haze, she could make out the shape of him. Tall, lean, hat pulled low. Dust motes hung in the air between him and her uncle like something suspended in amber. "Who the hell are you?" Her uncle's voice cracked on the last word. Martin Carter was a big man, heavy through the shoulders, used to getting his way through sheer bulk and volume. But right now he sounded smaller than Lena had ever heard him. "Just passing through?" The stranger's voice was flat. "Saw the sign at the gate. Said you might need a hand with the cattle. We're full up." "Didn't look that way from the road." Martin took a step back, and Lena realized with a shock that bordered on disbelief that he was actually retreating. In 6 years, since her father died and Martin moved in to manage things, she'd never seen him back down from anything. "This is family business," Martin said. "You need to move along." The stranger tilted his head slightly, and even in the dim barn light, Lena caught the edge of something dangerous in the movement. "Looked like assault to me, but I'm willing to forget what I saw if you are." The silence stretched. Lena's heart hammered so hard she thought they'd both hear it. Finally, Martin spat into the straw. "Ranch hand position pays $30 a month. Bunkhouse is out back. You start tomorrow, 4 a.m. Don't be late." He turned without looking at Lena and walked out, his footsteps heavy on the packed earth. The stranger waited until the sound faded before he moved. He crossed to where Lena still half sat in the dirt and extended a hand. She stared at it for a long moment, calloused palm, clean nails, a thin white scar across the knuckles, before she took it. He pulled her up easily. Up close she could see his face under the hat brim, maybe 30, maybe older, with eyes the color of winter sky and a jaw that looked like it had been on the wrong end of a few fists itself. "You all right?" he asked. Lena touched her lip, and her fingers came away red. "I've had worse." Something flickered across his expression, anger maybe, or pity, but he kept his voice even. "Got a name?" "Lena Carter. This is my—" She stopped. "This was my father's ranch, Cole Ryder." He let go of her hand and took a step back, giving her space. "Your uncle run things now?" "Something like that." Cole looked around the barn, at the stalls that needed mucking, the tack that wanted mending, the whole general air of a place sliding slowly into disrepair. "How many head you running?" "About 200. Used to be more." Lena brushed the dirt off her skirt with shaking hands. She didn't know why she was telling him this. Didn't know why he'd stayed. "Look, mister, I appreciate what you did, but you should probably just keep riding. Martin's not— he doesn't take well to interference." "I can see that." Cole settled his hat more firmly on his head. "But I need the work, and it looks like you need the help. I'll stay out of his way. And yours, if you want." Lena wanted to tell him it was a bad idea. Wanted to warn him that Martin had a mean streak wider than the Snake River and a temper that could turn on a dime. But the truth was, she was so tired of being alone in this that she just nodded. "Bunkhouse is around back, like he said. There's no one else in it right now. We lost our last 2 hands about a month ago." "They quit?" "Martin doesn't pay regular. They got tired of waiting." She met his eyes. "You might want to remember that." Cole's expression didn't change. "I'll keep it in mind. You need anything for that lip?" "I'm fine." He nodded slowly, like he didn't quite believe her but knew better than to push. "All right then, I'll see you in the morning, Miss Carter." He walked out into the fading daylight, and Lena stood alone in the barn with her pulse still racing and the taste of blood in her mouth. She didn't know who Cole Ryder was or where he'd come from, but for the first time in 6 years, someone had stepped between her and Martin's fists. It wouldn't last. Nothing good ever did on this ranch. But for just a moment, standing in the settling dust, Lena let herself imagine what it might feel like if it did. The next morning, she woke before dawn like always, her jaw throbbing where Martin's rifle stock had connected. She dressed in the dark, worn cotton dress, boots with the sole starting to separate, hair tied back with a strip of leather, and made her way down to the kitchen. The house was quiet. Martin would sleep until 6, then come down expecting breakfast on the table and coffee hot. Lena had learned the routine the hard way. She built up the fire in the stove and put the coffee on, then started on biscuits. Her hands moved through the familiar motions while her mind wandered. She kept seeing that moment in the barn, the way Cole had stood there, utterly still, and somehow made Martin back down without raising a finger. It didn't make sense. Martin was afraid of exactly 2 things in this world: losing money and looking weak. Cole Ryder was nobody, a drifter without even a horse as far as she could tell. He should have been an easy target, but he wasn't. The biscuits were in the oven when she heard footsteps on the back porch. Too light for Martin. She tensed, then forced herself to relax when Cole appeared in the doorway. "Morning," he said. "Saw the light. Hope I'm not intruding." "You're early. Martin won't be down for another hour. Figured I'd get a start on things. Where do you want me?" Lena wiped her hands on her apron. "Cattle are in the north pasture. They need to be moved to the creek grazing today. Gate's broken on the south pen, been meaning to fix it for 2 weeks. And if you can manage it, the barn roof has a leak that's getting worse." Cole listened without interrupting, his hat in his hands. "I'll start with the gate. Roof's going to need supplies I don't have yet. There's lumber in the shed, but most of it's warped, and we're low on nails. I'll make do for now." He hesitated. "You need help with anything here first?" The question caught her off guard. The last ranch hand they'd had, a man named Tommy, who left after Martin hit him with a shovel for talking back, had never once offered to help with housework. It wasn't a man's job, and Lena was just the girl who cooked and cleaned. "I'm fine," she said. Cole put his hat back on. "All right, I'll be around if you change your mind." He left through the back door, and Lena stood at the stove watching through the window as he crossed the yard toward the pens. There was something different about the way he moved. Economical, deliberate, like a man who'd learned not to waste energy on unnecessary motion. Martin came down at 6 sharp, poured himself coffee, and sat at the table without a word. Lena set his breakfast in front of him, biscuits, gravy, eggs fried in bacon fat, and retreated to the counter. "That drifter still here?" Martin asked around a mouthful of biscuit. "Yes, sir. He's working on the south gate." Martin grunted. "He causes trouble, you tell me." "Yes, sir. And you stay away from him. I don't need you getting ideas." Lena's hands stilled on the dish towel. "I won't. See that you don't." Martin pushed back from the table. "I'm riding into town. Be back this evening. Make sure there's supper ready." He left without clearing his plate. Lena waited until she heard his horse leave the yard before she let out the breath she'd been holding. The morning passed in the usual rhythm. She cleaned the kitchen, swept the floors, took washing down to the creek. It was October, and the water was cold enough to ache, but she scrubbed Martin's shirts and her own few dresses until her knuckles were raw. When she carried the wet clothes back to hang them on the line, she saw Cole working on the gate. He'd stripped off his jacket despite the chill and was bent over the broken hinge with a hammer and a handful of nails that looked like they'd been salvaged from elsewhere. She hung the washing and tried not to watch him. Failed. "That hinge is cracked through," she called. "You won't get it to hold." Cole straightened and wiped sweat from his forehead with his sleeve. "Got a piece of strap iron in the shed. I can brace it." "Martin won't pay for new materials." "Didn't ask him to." Cole crossed to where she stood by the clothesline. "How's your jaw?" "It's fine." Liar. But he said it without heat, almost gentle. "You ice it at all?" "We don't have ice." "Cold water then. Wet cloth. Keep the swelling down." Lena met his eyes. "You a doctor when you're not fixing gates?" "No, ma'am. Just broke enough bones to know the basics." He glanced toward the house. "Your uncle always like this?" "Like what?" "Mean." The word hung between them, simple and true. Lena looked away. "It's not your concern." "Maybe not, but I'm working here now, so it sort of is." "You won't be working here long if you keep asking questions." The sharpness in her voice surprised even her. "Martin doesn't like people in his business." Cole was quiet for a moment. "Fair enough. But if he puts hands on you again while I'm around, he's going to have a problem. He owns this place. He doesn't own you. Lena's breath caught. No one had said that to her, not in 6 years, not since her father died and Martin showed up with a lawyer and papers that said he was executor of the estate until Lena turned 25. 5 more years of this. 5 more years of being invisible in her own home. You don't know what you're talking about, she said, but the words came out weak. Maybe not. Cole settled his hat back on his head. But I know what I saw in that barn. And I know you didn't deserve it. He walked back to the gate before she could respond. Lena stood holding a wet dress, the wind picking up around her, and felt something crack open in her chest. Some small, desperate thing she'd thought was dead. Beth. Martin came home after dark, smelling like whiskey and cigars. Lena served him dinner, roast chicken, potatoes, the last of the summer beans, and cleared his plate in silence. That drifter get the gate fixed? He asked. Yes, sir. He say anything to you? No, sir. Martin studied her with red-rimmed eyes. You're lying. Lena's pulse jumped, but she kept her voice steady. He asked where the cattle needed moving, that's all. Better be all. Martin pushed back from the table and grabbed her wrist. Not hard enough to bruise, but hard enough to hurt. You remember what I told you. You're nothing without this ranch, and you don't got this ranch without me. You understand? Yes, sir. He let go and headed upstairs. Lena waited until she heard his door close before she allowed herself to shake. She finished the dishes with trembling hands, banked the fire, and climbed the stairs to her own small room under the eaves. It had been hers since childhood, the same iron bed, the same patchwork quilt her mother made, the same view of the north pasture through a window that stuck in summer and leaked in winter. She sat on the edge of the bed and touched her jaw where the bruise was blooming. In the morning it would be purple. In 3 days it would yellow. In a week it would fade, and then Martin would find some new reason to remind her who held the power here. You don't own me, she thought. But the truth was more complicated than that. Martin controlled her inheritance, controlled the ranch, controlled every dollar that came in or went out. Without his say-so, she couldn't sell a single head of cattle, couldn't hire help or fire it, couldn't even leave without forfeiting everything her father had built. The law said she had to wait until she was 25. Then the estate would pass to her outright and Martin would have no claim. 5 more years felt like a lifetime. Lena lay down without undressing and stared at the ceiling. Through the thin walls she could hear Martin snoring. Outside, the wind rattled the loose shingles Cole had mentioned. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, high and lonesome. She closed her eyes and tried to sleep. Failed. Chops. The days fell into a pattern. Lena woke before dawn, made breakfast, cleaned, cooked, worked through an endless list of chores that never seemed to get shorter. Cole worked the ranch with a quiet competence that would have been impressive if Lena had let herself notice. But she was trying not to notice. It was safer that way. Still, she couldn't help but see the changes. The gate he'd fixed didn't sag anymore. The barn roof stopped leaking. The water trough he'd repaired held without spilling half its contents into the mud. Small things. The kind of things her father would have done. A week passed, then 2. Martin paid Cole at the end of the first month, $15 instead of the $30 he'd promised. And Cole took it without complaint. You're getting cheated, Lena told him when Martin was out of earshot. They were in the barn, Lena sorting harness leather, Cole mending a broken bridle. I know. So why stay? Cole didn't look up from his work. I got my reasons. That's not an answer. It's the only one I got. He pulled the thread tight and cut it with his knife. Why do you stay? Lena's hands stilled. It's complicated. Most things are. She set down the piece of leather she'd been holding. My father left this place to me. All of it. But the will says Martin administers the estate until I'm 25. I can't sell anything, can't make decisions, can't even access the ranch account without his signature. How old are you now? 20. Cole was quiet for a long moment. That's a long time to wait. I don't have a choice. Everybody's got a choice. Some are just worse than others. Lena looked at him, really looked at him for the first time since he'd arrived. He had the kind of face that didn't give much away, but there were lines around his eyes that spoke of hard years and harder decisions. What happened to you? She asked. What makes you think something happened? You don't talk like a ranch hand, and you move like someone who's used to being in fights. Cole's mouth quirked in something that wasn't quite a smile. I was a lawman for a while, down in Colorado. Didn't work out. Why not? Like I said, complicated. He stood and brushed dust off his pants. I should check on the cattle. He left before she could push further. Lena sat alone in the barn with the smell of leather and hay and old wood, and thought about men who ran from their past and women who couldn't. Itant. October bled into November. The weather turned cold, the kind of cold that seeped into bones and didn't let go. Lena wore her mother's old shawl over her dress and tried to keep the fire going without burning through their wood too fast. Martin's temper got worse as the money got tighter. He stayed out later, came home drunker, found more reasons to raise his voice or his hand. Lena learned to make herself small, to move quiet, to never meet his eyes. But Cole noticed. "You need to get out of here," he said one afternoon. They were mucking out stalls, the work hard and mindless. Martin had ridden into town again and wouldn't be back until dark. "I told you, I know what you told me, but there's got to be another way." "There isn't." Lena stabbed her pitchfork into the soiled straw harder than necessary. "The law's the law. I have to wait." Law's also supposed to protect people from getting beat on. You think the sheriff cares? Martin's his cousin. They drink together every Saturday night. Even if I went to him, which I won't, he'd just send me right back here. Cole leaned on his shovel. "What about your father's lawyer? The one who drew up the will?" "Dead, heart attack 2 years ago. Anyone else? Family? Friends?" Lena laughed, and it came out bitter. "My mother's people are back east. Haven't heard from them since the funeral. And my friends—" She stopped. "I don't have friends." Martin made sure of that. "What do you mean?" "He told everyone in town I was touched in the head. Grieving too hard, not right in my thinking. After a while, people stopped coming around." She met Cole's eyes. "That's what he does. Makes you small enough that nobody sees you disappear." Cole's jaw tightened. "He's stealing from you, isn't he?" It wasn't a question. Lena opened her mouth to deny it, then closed it again. "I don't know, maybe. I don't see the books." "Where does he keep them?" "His office, upstairs. He locks it." "Locks can be picked." "No." Lena dropped her pitchfork. "Absolutely not. You get caught going through Martin's things and he'll kill you. I'm not exaggerating. So we wait until he's gone, out of town for the day. He's never out of town for a whole day. Then we make it fast." Cole stepped closer, his voice low and urgent. "Listen to me. If he's stealing from the estate, that's fraud. Changes the whole situation. You could get a judge to remove him as executor, take control now instead of waiting 5 years. You don't know that. I know the law well enough. And I know men like your uncle. They don't stop on their own. They have to be stopped." Lena wanted to argue, wanted to tell him it was too dangerous, too risky, that she'd survived this long by keeping her head down and she wasn't about to change tactics now. But the truth was she was drowning, had been drowning for 6 years, and Cole Ryder was the first person who'd bothered to throw her a rope. "All right," she heard herself say, "but we do it my way. Careful. And if anything goes wrong, you leave. Just get on your horse and ride and don't look back." Cole nodded. "Deal." They shook on it, his hand warm and rough in hers, and Lena felt something shift. Not hope. She wasn't fool enough for hope. But maybe possibility. Maybe a chance. 3 days later, Martin announced he was riding to the county seat to settle some business with the land office. He'd be gone from sunup to sundown. Lena's heart kicked into a higher gear, but she kept her face neutral. "Yes, sir. I'll have supper waiting." Martin grunted and left before dawn. Lena watched from the kitchen window until he was out of sight, then grabbed her shawl and ran to the bunkhouse. Cole was already awake, dressed, waiting. "He gone?" "Just left. We've got maybe 10 hours. "That's plenty." Cole pulled on his coat. "You have a hairpin?" "What?" "For the lock. Hairpin works best." Lena reached up and pulled one from her hair. "You've done this before." "Once or twice." He took the pin and bent it with practiced efficiency. "Lead the way." They crossed the yard to the house. Lena's pulse, hammering. Martin's office was at the end of the upstairs hallway. past Lena's room and the spare bedroom that hadn't been opened since her mother died. The door was heavy oak with a brass lock. Cole knelt in front of it and worked the hairpin into the mechanism, his face set in concentration. 30 seconds later, something clicked. Got it. He turned the handle and the door swung open. The office was exactly as Lena remembered from the rare times she'd been allowed inside. Heavy desk, filing cabinets, a gun rack on one wall. Everything neat, organized, controlled. Books will be in the desk or the cabinet, Cole said. You take the desk, I'll take the cabinet. Lena moved to the desk and started opening drawers. Bills, receipts, correspondence, most of it routine. She was about to give up when she found a ledger in the bottom drawer, hidden under a stack of old newspapers. Cole. He came to stand beside her as she opened it. The entries went back 3 years, written in Martin's cramped hand. Income from cattle sales, expenses for feed and repairs, wages paid. Wages paid. Lena's hand started to shake. He's been paying himself a salary, $500 a month. Is that high? For a ranch this size? Yes. And look, she pointed to another line. Property tax, $1,500 last year. But I know for a fact the assessment on this place is only $800. Cole leaned over her shoulder, reading. He's inflating the expenses and pocketing the difference. What about income? Lena flipped back through the pages. The numbers swam in front of her eyes. Cattle sales they're lower than they should be. We sold 100 head last spring. Market rate was $40 a head. That should be $4,000, but he's only showing $2,800. He's skimming, more than skimming. He's bleeding this place dry. Lena's voice cracked. No wonder we can't afford to hire proper help. No wonder the fences are falling apart and the roof's leaking. He's stealing everything. Cole put a hand on her shoulder, steady and warm. This is enough. More than enough. We get this to a judge. Wait. Lena turned more pages, dread pooling in her stomach. There's more. The last section of the ledger was titled Outstanding Debts. The list was long. Too long. Thousands of dollars owed to the bank, to suppliers, to... He's been gambling, Lena whispered. Look at these. Personal loan from Jay Sutton, $3,000. Personal loan from R. Hayes, $1,800. These aren't ranch debts. These are his debts. Cole swore under his breath. How much total? Lena added up the numbers with shaking hands. Almost $12,000. Can the ranch cover that? No, not even close. She looked up at him, and for the first time since her father died, Lena felt true fear. Not fear of being hit or being hungry or being alone. Fear of losing everything. If the creditors call these loans, they'll take the ranch. All of it. Everything my father built. Not if we move first. Cole's voice was hard. We take this ledger, we go to the county judge, we get Martin removed as executor, and the debts declared void. They won't be void. Even if Martin's removed, the estate is still liable. Then we sell something. Fast. Get enough cash to settle the worst of it and buy time for the rest. Lena wanted to laugh. Or cry. She wasn't sure which. Sell what? I don't have authority to sell anything. You do if you've got this. Cole tapped the ledger. Proof of fraud. A judge will give you emergency control. Maybe. If he believes me. If Martin doesn't get to him first. Lena closed the book and hugged it to her chest. I need to think. We don't have time to think. Your uncle will be back tonight. I know. She cut him off, sharper than she meant to. I know, but this is my life, Cole. My future. And I just need a minute. He backed off, hands raised. All right, take your minute. But we lock this office back up and we hide that ledger somewhere he won't find it. Agreed? Agreed. They put everything back the way they'd found it, locked the door, and returned downstairs. Lena hid the ledger under a loose floorboard in her room, the same place she used to hide her diary when she was a girl. Then she went to the kitchen and started on supper, because if Martin came home and there was no food on the table, he'd know something was wrong. Cole found her an hour later, peeling potatoes with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. You all right? He asked. No. Lena didn't look up. But I will be. What are you going to do? She set down the knife and finally met his eyes. I'm going to fight back. The words hung between them, and Cole nodded slowly, like he'd been waiting for her to say exactly that. Good, he said. Then we need a plan. But plans took time, and time was the one thing Lena didn't have. Martin came home that evening in a foul mood, slamming doors and cursing about the land office clerk who'd kept him waiting for 3 hours. Lena served his supper and disappeared upstairs before he could find a reason to take his anger out on her. She lay in bed that night with the ledger hidden beneath her floorboards and felt the weight of it like a stone on her chest. The numbers kept running through her head. $12,000, more money than she'd see in a lifetime, more money than the ranch could possibly pay back without selling off most of the herd. And if they did that, there'd be nothing left to rebuild with. Unless... The thought came to her in the dark, unwelcome and terrifying. Unless she could prove Martin had defrauded the estate. Unless she could get the debts invalidated as his personal responsibility, not the ranch's. Unless she could find a judge who'd listen to a 20-year-old girl accusing her own blood of theft. Sleep didn't come until nearly dawn, and when it did, it was thin and troubled. The next morning, Cole was waiting for her in the barn when she came to collect eggs. He had a bridle in his hands, but he wasn't working on it, just standing there like he'd been expecting her. "Did you sleep?" he asked. "Some." Lena set down her basket. "You?" "Enough." He hung the bridle on its peg. "I've been thinking about what you said, about fighting back. And I've got some ideas, but you're not going to like them. Try me." Cole pulled a folded paper from his pocket and smoothed it out on a hay bale. It was a list, written in his careful block letters. "First thing we need is a lawyer, not someone from town. They're all in Martin's pocket one way or another. Someone from outside. Someone who doesn't owe him favors. That costs money. Money I don't have. What about your father's savings? Anything in the house?" And Lena shook her head. Martin cleaned out the safe the week after the funeral. Said it was for operating expenses. Of course he did. Cole's jaw tightened. "All right. So we need cash, which means we need to sell something Martin won't notice is gone right away." "Like what?" "He counts the cattle every week, checks the horses, goes through the stores like he thinks I'm stealing cornmeal." "What about your mother's things?" The suggestion hit Lena like a slap. "No." "Hear me out." "I said no." Her voice came out sharper than she intended. "That's all I have left of her. I'm not selling it." Cole raised his hands. "All right. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have suggested it." They stood in silence for a moment, the tension thick enough to choke on. Finally, Lena let out a long breath. "There might be another way. My father had an account at the bank in Cheyenne, separate from the ranch account. He set it up for me when I was 16. My name's on it. Can you access it?" "I don't know. I haven't tried since before he died. Martin might have closed it." She looked at Cole. "It's a 2-day ride to Cheyenne. 3 if we don't push the horses. I can't be gone 3 days. Martin would know something was wrong. Then we make it 2. Cole folded up his list. "You tell him you're going to visit your mother's grave. It's in Cheyenne, isn't it?" "How did you—" "You mentioned it once, said she was buried where she grew up." He met her eyes. "Martin lets you visit?" "Once a year, in the spring." Lena's throat tightened. "He says more than that is wasteful." "Wasteful?" Cole repeated the word like it tasted bad. "All right. So you tell him you want to go now, that you've been thinking about her, and you need to pay your respects before winter sets in." "He won't believe me." "He might, especially if you act meek about it. Ask permission real gentle-like. Make it seem like you're begging." Cole's expression hardened. "I know it's not fair, but if it gets you to Cheyenne and back without him getting suspicious, it's worth swallowing your pride." Lena wanted to argue, wanted to tell him she was done playing weak for Martin's benefit. But he was right. This was bigger than pride. This was survival. "When?" she asked. "Soon as possible. This week if we can manage it." "And you'd come with me?" "You think I'd let you ride that far alone?" Cole shook his head. "Besides, you might need a witness, someone who can testify that you accessed your own money and didn't steal it from the ranch." It was a good point. Lena picked up her egg basket, her mind already racing ahead. "I'll ask him tonight, after supper when he's had a few drinks. He's more agreeable then. Be careful." "I'm always careful." But that night, sitting across from Martin at the dinner table, Lena didn't feel careful. She felt reckless and terrified and strung so tight she thought she might snap. Martin was on his 3rd glass of whiskey, the bottle within easy reach. He'd been complaining about the cattle prices and the cost of feed and how the whole damn territory was going to hell in a handbasket. Lena had learned to make sympathetic noises without actually agreeing, and tonight she employed every trick she knew. When he finally paused to refill his glass, she took her chance. "Uncle Martin?" Her voice came out small and hesitant, exactly the way he liked it. "I wanted to ask you something." "What?" "I know it's not spring yet, but I was hoping I might visit Mama's grave. It's been weighing on me, and I thought maybe if I went now, before the weather turns bad." Martin squinted at her over his glass. "What brought this on?" Lena twisted her napkin in her lap. "I've just been thinking about her lately, missing her. And I know you said once a year, but I thought if it wouldn't be too much trouble." "It's trouble." Martin took a long drink. "Trouble and expense. Who'd do the cooking while you're gone?" "I'd only be gone 2 days. I could make meals ahead, leave everything ready." 2 days. He said it like she'd suggested 2 months. "And I suppose you'd want to take that drifter with you, for protection." Lena's heart kicked, but she kept her voice steady. "It's a long ride. I thought it would be safer." "Safer," Martin laughed, ugly and mean. "You think I don't know what you're doing? Think I don't see the way you look at him?" Don't lie to me." He slammed his glass down hard enough to crack it. "You think because he fixed a few gates and patched the roof that he's some kind of hero? He's nothing. Just another saddle bum who'll take what he can and move on." Lena flinched. "I just want to visit Mama's grave, that's all." Martin stared at her, his eyes red-rimmed and calculating. For a long moment she thought he was going to say no, thought he was going to backhand her across the face and send her to bed without another word. Instead, he reached for the bottle and poured himself another drink. "Fine, go. But you leave at first light, and you're back by dark the second day. And if I find out you've been up to anything other than standing over your mother's headstone, there'll be hell to pay. Understand?" "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir." "Get out of my sight." Lena didn't need to be told twice. She cleared the table with shaking hands and retreated to the kitchen, where she stood gripping the edge of the counter and trying to breathe normally. He'd said yes. Against all odds and common sense, Martin had actually said yes. She found Cole in the barn an hour later, bedding down the horses for the night. "We leave tomorrow," she said without preamble. "First light." Cole looked up from the stall he was mucking. "He agreed?" "He thinks I'm visiting my mother's grave." Lena wrapped her arms around herself. "We have to be back by dark the second day, or he'll come looking." "That's tight, but we can do it. Ride hard. Don't stop except to rest the horses." He set down his pitchfork. "You sure about this?" "No." Lena met his eyes. "But I'm doing it anyway." They left before dawn, the world still gray and cold. Lena had packed light, a change of clothes, some bread and cheese, the ledger wrapped in oilcloth and hidden at the bottom of her saddlebag. She'd left 2 days' worth of meals in the cold box and the fire banked low. Martin hadn't come down to see them off. She told herself that was a good thing. The ride to Cheyenne was brutal. November had brought the first real cold, the kind that bit through layers and settled in your bones. They pushed the horses as hard as they dared, stopping only to water them and let them catch their breath. Cole didn't talk much, which suited Lena fine. She was too busy trying not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. If the bank account was closed, they'd have wasted 2 days and earned Martin's suspicion for nothing. If Martin came looking for them early, there'd be no explanation that would save her. If they got back late, she forced herself to stop. Dwelling on maybes and what-ifs wouldn't change anything. She had to keep moving forward, had to believe that somehow this would work out. They made camp that night in a shallow draw that offered some protection from the wind. Cole built a small fire while Lena saw to the horses, and they ate in silence as the stars came out overhead. "You ever been this far from the ranch?" Cole asked eventually. "Not since Mama's funeral. Before that, we used to come to Cheyenne twice a year. Mama had people here, an aunt and some cousins." Lena pulled her blanket tighter around her shoulders. "After she died, they wrote a few times, asked if I needed anything, but Martin answered the letters, told them I was doing fine and didn't need charity." "Did you? Need charity?" "I needed out." The words came before she could stop them. "I needed someone to see what was happening and do something about it. But they were too far away, and I was too young, and nobody wanted to believe that family could be that cruel." Cole poked at the fire with a stick. "Family's the cruelest kind. They know exactly where to hurt you." Something in his tone made Lena look at him more carefully. You speaking from experience? Some. He didn't elaborate. Get some sleep. We've got another long day tomorrow. Lena wrapped herself in her blanket and lay down close to the fire. But sleep was a long time coming. She kept thinking about the bank, about the account her father had set up in her name. He'd done it quietly, without telling Martin, and he'd made Lena promise not to mention it to anyone. This is for you, he'd said, pressing the bank book into her hands. For emergencies. For when you need to stand on your own 2 feet. She'd been 16 and hadn't understood what he meant. Now she did. They reached Cheyenne late the next morning, the horses lathered and blowing hard. The town had grown since Lena last saw it. New buildings going up on the east side, more people on the streets. It felt loud and crowded after the isolation of the ranch. The bank was a solid brick building near the center of town. Lena stood outside it for a long moment, gathering her courage before she pushed through the door. Inside it smelled like paper and leather and old money. A clerk behind the counter looked up as they entered, his expression shifting from polite interest to mild disapproval as he took in their dusty clothes and wind-burned faces. "Can I help you?" he asked. Lena stepped forward. "I need to access an account. It's under my name. Lena Carter." The clerk's eyebrows rose. "Carter? Any relation to Robert Carter?" "He was my father." "I see." The clerk pulled out a ledger and began flipping through pages. "And you have identification?" Lena's stomach sank. No, I didn't think. Bank policy, miss. We can't release funds without proper identification. But it's my account. My name is on it. Be that as it may. Is there a manager I could speak to?" Cole's voice cut across the clerk's objections, firm but polite. "This lady rode 2 days to get here. Least you could do is let her talk to someone with authority." The clerk's mouth thinned. "I'll see if Mr. Harrison is available." He disappeared through a door behind the counter. Lena looked at Cole. "I didn't bring anything. How could I be so stupid?" "You're not stupid. We'll figure it out." A moment later, an older man emerged, gray-haired and dignified in a suit that had seen better days. "Miss Carter? I'm Edward Harrison. I understand you're trying to access your father's account." "My account," Lena corrected gently. "He set it up in my name when I was 16. Robert Carter was the cosigner." Recognition flickered across Harrison's face. "I remember your father. Good man. Terrible thing. What happened to him?" He gestured toward a small office off to the side. "Why don't we step in here where we can talk privately?" They followed him into the office. Harrison settled behind a desk piled with papers and folded his hands. "Now then, you say you're Robert Carter's daughter?" "Yes, sir." "And you're trying to access the account he established for you 6 years ago?" "Yes, sir. Account number 4721. Lena had memorized it, had kept the bank book hidden under her mattress until the day Martin found it and burned it in the stove. Harrison pulled out a different ledger and found the page. "Here we are. Account 4721, established June 1880 in the name of Lena Marie Carter, co-signed by Robert James Carter." He looked up. "The balance is currently $743. Relief flooded through Lena so fast she felt dizzy. "It's still active?" "It is. Your father made regular deposits until his death. Nothing's been touched since then." Harrison studied her over his spectacles. "Which brings me to my next question. Why hasn't this account been administered as part of your father's estate?" Lena exchanged a glance with Cole. This was the moment. Either Harrison would help them or he'd throw them out. She took a breath and committed. "Because my Uncle Martin didn't know about it. My father set it up separately. For me." "I see." Harrison's expression didn't change. "And your uncle is the executor of your father's estate?" "Yes, sir. Until I turned 25. "That's quite a long time." Harrison closed the ledger. "Miss Carter, I'm afraid I can't release these funds to you without proper documentation. Your uncle, as executor, would need to authorize any withdrawals." "No." The word came out harder than Lena intended. "That money is mine. My name is on the account, not his." "I understand, but the law is clear. The law says a woman can access her own money." Lena pulled the oilcloth bundle from her bag and set it on the desk. "And I have documentation. Proof that my uncle has been defrauding my father's estate. Proof that he's stolen thousands of dollars and buried the ranch in debt." Harrison's eyebrows climbed toward his hairline. Those are serious accusations. They're true. Lena unwrapped the ledger and opened it to the pages she'd marked. Look, he's been inflating expenses, skimming from cattle sales, taking out personal loans in the estate's name. Everything's here. Harrison pulled the ledger closer and began reading. The office fell silent except for the ticking of a clock on the wall and the rustle of turning pages. Lena's hands were clenched so tight in her lap that her nails bit into her palms. Finally, Harrison sat back. Where did you get this? From my uncle's office. You stole it. I took what's mine. Lena met his gaze without flinching. That ranch is my inheritance. My father built it from nothing, and he left it to me. And Martin's been bleeding it dry while I watched. So yes, I took his ledger, and I'll do whatever else I need to do to stop him. Harrison was quiet for a long moment. Then he sighed and rubbed his temples. Your father was a friend of mine, Miss Carter. We served together in the war. And I'll tell you what I told him when he came to set up this account. You've got your mother's fire and your father's stubbornness, and those are dangerous traits in a woman. Is that a yes or a no, sir? A smile ghosted across Harrison's face. It's a yes, but not for the reasons you think. He pulled out a withdrawal slip and began filling it out. This account is in your name. Your father may have been the co-signer, but legally, the money belongs to you. I can release it without your uncle's authorization. You can? Lena's voice cracked. I can. However, Harrison held up a hand. However, I strongly advise you to take this evidence to a lawyer. What your uncle's doing is illegal, and you have grounds to petition for his removal as executor, but you'll need professional help to make that happen. Do you know anyone? I might. Harrison finished the withdrawal slip and pushed it across the desk. There's a lawyer here in Cheyenne, named Sarah Brennan. She's sharp as a tack and doesn't take kindly to men who abuse their authority. I'll write you a letter of introduction. Thank you. Lena took the slip with trembling hands. $743. It wouldn't solve everything, but it was enough to hire a lawyer, enough to fight back. Harrison pulled out a piece of stationery and began writing. A word of advice, Miss Carter. Men like your uncle don't give up power easily. When you move against him, you'll need to be ready for the consequences. I'm ready. Are you? Harrison looked up, his expression grave. Because once you start this, there's no going back. He'll fight you with everything he has, and he'll make your life hell while he does it. Lena thought about the bruises she wore like badges of shame, thought about 6 years of being invisible in her own home, thought about the ranch her father had loved, dying by inches under Martin's neglect. He's already made my life hell, she said. At least now I'll be fighting back. Harrison signed the letter and handed it to her. Then I wish you luck. You're going to need it. They left the bank with $743 in cash, more money than Lena had ever held in her life, and Harrison's letter of introduction tucked safely in her bag. Cole didn't say anything until they were outside, standing on the boardwalk with the midday sun trying and failing to cut through the November cold. You sure about this? He asked. About the lawyer? I don't have a choice. You always have a choice. You could take that money and run. Get on a train and go somewhere Martin will never find you. Lena looked at him. Is that what you do? I did do it. Twice. Cole's jaw tightened. And both times I regretted it. So no, I'm not saying you should run. I'm just saying you could. I'm not running. Lena started walking. Sarah Brennan's office is on 3rd Street. That's what the clerk said. They found the lawyer's office above a dry goods store, a narrow staircase leading up to a door with frosted glass and neat black lettering. Lena knocked before she could lose her nerve. Come in, a woman's voice called. The office was small but orderly, shelves lined with law books and a desk covered in neat stacks of paper. The woman behind the desk looked up as they entered, and Lena felt a jolt of surprise. Sarah Brennan was younger than she'd expected, maybe 30, with dark hair pinned back and intelligent eyes that missed nothing. She was dressed in a simple shirtwaist and skirt, practical and professional. Can I help you? She asked. Lena held out Harrison's letter. Mr. Harrison at the bank sent us. He said you might be able to help with a legal matter. Brennan took the letter and read it quickly, her expression sharpening with interest. Edward sent you. That's a good recommendation. She gestured to 2 chairs. Sit. Tell me what's going on. So Lena told her about her father's death, about the will that left Martin in control, About 6 years of abuse and theft and watching helplessly as her inheritance crumbled. Cole added details where needed, but mostly he stayed quiet, letting Lena tell her own story. When she finished, Brennan sat back and steepled her fingers. You understand that fighting this will be difficult? Your uncle is the legal executor. The burden of proof is on you to show he's violated his fiduciary duty. I have proof. Lena put the ledger on the desk. Everything's documented. The inflated expenses, the personal debts, all of it. Brennan opened the ledger and began reading. Her expression remained neutral, but Lena saw her eyes narrow at certain entries. This is good. Very good. But there's a problem. What problem? You obtained this through theft. Your uncle could argue the evidence is inadmissible. Lena's heart sank. So it's useless? I didn't say that. Brennan closed the ledger. But we'll need to be strategic. The judge I'd bring this to is fair-minded, but he's also conservative. He won't like the idea of a young woman accusing her guardian of fraud, even with evidence. We need to build a case he can't ignore. How? We start with a formal audit of the estate. I petition the court to appoint an independent accountant to review the books. Your uncle will fight it, but if I can show probable cause, and this ledger gives me that, the judge will grant it. Once we have official documentation of the fraud, we move to have your uncle removed as executor and the debts declared as personal responsibility. It sounded complicated. It sounded like it would take time they didn't have. Lena said as much. Brennan's smile was thin. Justice is rarely fast, Miss Carter, but it can be effective. The question is whether you're willing to see this through. What will it cost? My retainer is $200. If we go to trial, it'll be more. But we can discuss payment arrangements. Lena thought about the money in her bag. $743. Half of it would go to the lawyer. The rest would need to last until the ranch was back in her control, if it ever was. I'll pay it, she said. When can we start? I'll draft the petition tonight. I can file it with the court Monday morning. Brennan pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. I'll need you to sign some documents, affidavits attesting to the abuse and the financial irregularities. The more detail you can provide, the better. They spent the next 2 hours going over everything. Lena's hand cramped from writing, but she forced herself to be thorough, to document every beating, every threat, every dollar she'd seen Martin waste or steal. Cole witnessed her signature, his own hand steady where hers shook. When they finally left the office, the sun was already sinking toward the horizon. They'd lost most of the day, which meant they'd have to ride through the night if they wanted any hope of making it back by Martin's deadline. They stopped long enough to buy supplies, jerky and hardtack, coffee and grain for the horses. And then they were riding again, pushing hard through the growing dark. You think she can do it? Cole asked as the lights of Cheyenne fell away behind them. The lawyer? I don't know. Lena shifted in her saddle, her body already protesting the long hours of riding. But she's the only chance I've got. They rode through the night in shifts, one sleeping while the other kept watch. Lena dozed fitfully, jerking awake at every sound, convinced that Martin had somehow found them. But the prairie stayed empty except for the wind and the occasional coyote call. Dawn came cold and gray. They stopped to water the horses and choke down some breakfast, then pushed on. Lena's whole body ached, her hands blistered from the reins, her legs cramping. But she didn't complain, couldn't afford to. The sun was a red smear on the horizon when they finally saw the ranch buildings in the distance. Lena's heart hammered as they rode into the yard. Martin's horse was in the corral, which meant he was home. Cole caught her eye. You ready? No, but let's go anyway. They dismounted and Cole took the horses to the barn, while Lena headed for the house. She pushed through the kitchen door to find Martin sitting at the table, a half-empty bottle in front of him. He looked up as she entered, his eyes bloodshot and mean. You're late. The road was rough. We had to go slow. Don't lie to me. Martin stood, swaying slightly. Where were you really? What were you doing in Cheyenne for 2 days? Lena's mouth went dry. I told you, I visited Mama's grave. For 2 days. I stayed with her cousin, Aunt Margaret. She wanted to visit. The lie came easily, smoothed by 6 years of practice. Martin crossed the room in 3 strides and grabbed her arm. You think I'm stupid? You think I don't know when you're lying? I'm not. His hand cracked across her face, hard enough to snap her head sideways. Lena tasted blood. "Where's the money?" Martin demanded. Everything stopped. The world narrowed to those 3 words and the sick certainty flooding through her. "What money?" "Don't play dumb." He shook her hard enough to rattle her teeth. "I went to check the books today. Thought I'd make sure everything was in order while you were gone. And I found my ledger missing." Lena's heart hammered against her ribs. "I don't know what you're talking about. You stole it. You went through my office and you took my ledger, and now you're going to tell me what you did with it. Or I swear I'll—" The kitchen door banged open. Cole stood in the doorway, and the look on his face made Martin's threats die in his throat. "Let her go," Cole said quietly. "This is none of your business, Drifter." "I'm making it my business." Cole took a step forward. "Now let her go." Martin's grip tightened on Lena's arm. "You're fired. Pack your things and get off my property." "It's not your property. It's hers." Cole's hand moved toward his belt, where Lena knew he kept a knife. "One more time. Let her go." For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Martin released Lena with a shove that sent her stumbling against the counter. "Both of you," he said, his voice shaking with rage. "Get out. I want you gone by morning." "Fine." Lena found her voice, found her spine. "We'll leave, but you should know. I filed a petition with the court in Cheyenne to have you removed as executor for fraud." Martin's face went white, then purple. "You did what?" "I hired a lawyer, gave her your ledger. She's petitioning for an audit of the estate." Lena's hands were shaking, but her voice held steady. "So you can threaten me all you want. It won't change anything. The truth's coming out whether you like it or not." Martin lunged for her. Cole caught him halfway across the room, one hand fisted in his shirt, the other bringing the knife up to rest against his ribs. "Don't," Cole said, and there was something in his voice that froze Martin in place. "Don't you even think about it." "You're dead," Martin spat. "Both of you. You hear me? Dead." "Maybe." Cole shoved him backward. "But not tonight. Tonight you're going to sit in your chair and stay there while we pack. And if you so much as twitch wrong, I'll put this knife somewhere you won't forget." They backed out of the kitchen together, Cole keeping himself between Lena and Martin. In the hallway, Lena's legs finally gave out and she sagged against the wall. "We have to leave," she whispered. "Right now. He'll kill us if we stay." "I know." Cole grabbed her hand. "Come on. Get what you need. We ride in 10 minutes. Lena ran to her room and threw clothes into a bag with shaking hands. The money from the bank was still in her saddlebag. She hadn't dared bring it into the house. Her mother's jewelry box sat on the dresser and she grabbed it without thinking, along with a photograph of her parents on their wedding day. 8 minutes later, she was back downstairs. Cole had their horses saddled and ready. They could hear Martin in the kitchen, smashing things and cursing. "Go," Cole said. "I'll be right behind you." Lena swung into the saddle and kicked her horse toward the gate. Behind her, she heard the kitchen door slam open, heard Martin shouting, then the sharp crack of a gunshot. She looked back in time to see Cole vault onto his horse, Martin standing in the doorway with a rifle. Another shot split the air, but they were already through the gate and riding hard into the darkness. They didn't stop until the ranch was miles behind them, and Lena's horse was blowing foam. Only then did Cole pull up, breathing hard. "You hit?" Lena asked. "No. You?" "No." She looked back the way they'd come, but there was only darkness. "He'll come after us." "I know." Cole checked his horse, running his hands over the animal's legs. "We can't outrun him. Not with the horses this tired. We need to find somewhere to hole up until morning." "Where?" "There's nothing out here but prairie." "There's the old line shack about 3 miles north. Your father built it back when he was running cattle on the open range. You remember it?" Lena remembered. A tiny one-room cabin, barely more than 4 walls and a roof, but it had a stove and a door that locked. "You think it's still standing?" "Only one way to find out." They found the line shack by moonlight, half collapsed and listing to one side, but intact enough to offer shelter. Cole got the horses inside and Lena barred the door. Then they sat in the darkness listening to the wind howl. "What now?" Lena asked finally. "Now we wait for your lawyer to do her job. Brennan files the petition, the judge orders the audit, and Martin gets removed as executor." Cole leaned against the wall. "Could take weeks, maybe months. We can't hide for months." "We won't have to." Once the petition's filed, Martin can't touch you without looking guilty. He makes a move on you, it'll just prove everything you said about him. Lena wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that the law would protect her, that justice would prevail, that all of this would somehow work out. But she'd spent 6 years learning that wanting something didn't make it true. "He's going to fight this," she said. "Fight dirty. You know that, right?" "Yeah." Cole's voice was grim. "I know." They sat in silence for a while, the cold seeping in through the gaps in the walls. Finally, Lena spoke again. "Why are you doing this? Helping me, I mean. You could have ridden on weeks ago." Cole was quiet for so long she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then, "I told you I was a lawman once, down in Colorado. You said it didn't work out." "It didn't. There was a rancher, rich son of a bitch, who owned half the county. He had a daughter, sweet girl, maybe 17, and he was selling her to a business partner, not in marriage, just selling her outright like livestock." Cole's voice went flat. "I tried to stop it. Went to the sheriff, to the judge. Nobody wanted to hear it, so I took matters into my own hands." "What happened?" "I got the girl out. Got her on a train to California where she had family. But the rancher had friends, and those friends didn't appreciate some nobody lawman interfering with their business. They ran me out of town, told me if I ever came back I'd hang." Lena absorbed this. "So you've been running ever since?" "More or less." Cole shifted against the wall. "Point is, I've seen what happens when men like your uncle get away with things. And I'm tired of running, tired of letting them win." "This isn't your fight." "Maybe not, but I'm in it now." He met her eyes in the darkness. "And I don't quit once I'm in." Something tight in Lena's chest loosened. She'd been alone for so long she'd forgotten what it felt like to have someone stand beside her, to have someone who wouldn't run when things got hard. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Don't thank me yet. We've still got a long way to go." They took turns keeping watch through the night, listening for the sound of horses that never came. When dawn broke gray and cold, they saddled up and rode north toward the main road. They couldn't go back to the ranch, couldn't stay in the territory without risking another confrontation with Martin. So they headed for Cheyenne, where at least they'd be close to Brennan and the court. The ride took 2 days. They camped rough, avoiding towns and settlements, living on jerky and hardtack and creek water. By the time they reached Cheyenne, Lena was so tired she could barely stay in the saddle. Brennan's office was closed when they arrived. It was Sunday, so they found a boarding house that didn't ask too many questions and paid for a week in advance. 2 rooms side by side with a shared washroom down the hall. Lena collapsed on this narrow bed and slept for 14 hours straight. When she woke, Cole was sitting by the window with a cup of coffee, watching the street. "Anything?" she asked. "Quiet so far." He handed her a second cup. "Brennan's office opens at 9. We'll go talk to her, see what the next step is." Lena sipped the coffee, weak and bitter but hot, and tried to organize her thoughts. Everything had happened so fast. 3 days ago, she'd been standing in Martin's kitchen, and now she was a fugitive in a boarding house, waiting to see if a lawyer she'd just met could save her entire future. It was insane. All of it. And yet here she was. At 9 o'clock, they knocked on Brennan's door. She opened it herself, looking surprised to see them. "Miss Carter, Mr. Ryder, I wasn't expecting you back so soon." "We had to leave the ranch," Lena said. "My uncle found out about the petition. He tried to—" She stopped, not sure how to finish. Brennan's expression hardened. "Come in. Tell me everything." So they did. The confrontation in the kitchen, the gunshots, the flight to the line shack. Brennan listened without interrupting, taking notes on a legal pad. When they finished, she set down her pen. "This actually works in our favor. Your uncle's violent response supports your claims of abuse, and attempting to harm you after you filed a legal petition could be construed as witness intimidation." "So what do we do?" Lena asked. "You stay in Cheyenne where you're safe. I'll expedite the petition, file an emergency motion based on the threats to your safety. If I can get you in front of Judge Morrison this week, we might be able to get a temporary restraining order against your uncle while the audit moves forward." "This week?" Hope flared in Lena's chest. "That fast? If the judge agrees it's an emergency, which, given your uncle's behavior, he should." Brennan stood. "But I need you to stay put. Don't go back to the ranch. Don't contact your uncle. And for the love of heaven, don't do anything that could be construed as provocation. Lena nodded. We'll stay here. Good. Brennan walked them to the door. I'll send word as soon as I know when the hearing is scheduled. In the meantime, try to rest. You both look exhausted. They were exhausted. Bone deep, soul tired, exhausted. But as they walked back to the boarding house through Cheyenne's busy streets, Lena felt something she hadn't felt in 6 years. She felt like she had a chance. That chance lasted exactly 3 days. Brennan got them in front of Judge Morrison on Wednesday morning. The courthouse was an imposing brick building that smelled like furniture polish and old paper, and Lena's hands wouldn't stop shaking as they climbed the stairs to the second-floor courtroom. Cole walked beside her, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. He'd bought a new shirt for the occasion, nothing fancy, just clean cotton without holes, and he'd shaved. Lena had worn her best dress, the dark blue one her mother had made years ago. It was out of fashion and the hem was frayed, but it was all she had. You'll be fine, Cole said quietly as they reached the courtroom door. Just tell the truth. What if he doesn't believe me? He will. But Cole's certainty felt thin against the weight of what they were about to do. Accusing your own blood of fraud and abuse wasn't something judges took lightly, especially when that blood was a man and you were just a girl who couldn't even control her own inheritance. Brennan was already inside, arranging papers at a table near the front. She looked up as they entered and gave Lena a brief nod. Sit behind me. Don't speak unless the judge addresses you directly, and whatever happens, stay calm. Lena took a seat on the hard wooden bench and tried to breathe normally. The courtroom was empty except for a clerk shuffling documents and a bailiff standing by the judge's chamber door. No Martin, which should have been a relief but somehow made everything worse. Not knowing where he was, what he was planning, the chamber door opened and Judge Morrison emerged. He was older than Lena expected, maybe 60, with iron gray hair and the kind of face that had probably been stern even as a child. Everyone stood as he took his seat behind the bench. Be seated, Morrison said, his voice carrying easily through the room. This is an emergency petition filed by Miss Lena Carter, represented by counsel Sarah Brennan, requesting immediate removal of Martin Carter as executor of the Robert Carter estate and the issuance of a restraining order. Miss Brennan, you may proceed. Brennan stood. Thank you, Your Honor. My client is the sole heir to the Robert Carter estate, valued at approximately $15,000, including land, livestock, and liquid assets. Her father's will appointed Martin Carter, the deceased's brother, as executor until Miss Carter reaches the age of 25. She is currently 20 years old. I've read the will, Morrison said. What's the basis for this emergency petition? Multiple grounds, Your Honor. First, documented evidence of financial fraud. Mr. Martin Carter has systematically embezzled from the estate through inflated expenses, skimmed proceeds from livestock sales, and incurred personal debts in the estate's name totaling nearly $12,000. Brennan held up the ledger. All of this is recorded in Mr. Carter's own hand in this accounting ledger, which my client obtained from his office. Morrison's eyebrows rose. Obtained or stole? The ledger documents estate business, Your Honor. My client has a legal right to review estate accounts. The fact that Mr. Martin Carter kept these records locked away from the rightful heir is itself evidence of wrongdoing. That's a creative interpretation, counsel. Continue. Second ground is a pattern of physical and emotional abuse. Mr. Martin Carter has repeatedly assaulted my client, most recently 3 days ago when she informed him of this petition. He struck her, threatened her life, and discharged a firearm at both my client and her companion as they fled the property. Can you prove these allegations? My client bears visible injuries from the most recent assault, and Mr. Cole Ryder, who witnessed the attack, is present to testify. Morrison looked past Brennan to where Cole sat. You're the companion in question? Cole stood. Yes, sir. I was working as a ranch hand. I saw Martin Carter strike Miss Carter multiple times, and I was present when he fired shots at us as we were leaving. Did he hit either of you? No, sir, but not for lack of trying. Morrison was quiet for a moment, his fingers steepled under his chin. This is a serious matter, Miss Brennan. You're asking me to remove a court-appointed executor based on ledger entries and testimony from a ranch hand who may or may not have his own motivations in this dispute. I understand the gravity, Your Honor, which is why I'm requesting an independent audit of the estate as a first step. If the audit confirms the fraud detailed in this ledger, then removal of the executor is warranted. In the meantime, my client needs protection from further abuse. Where is Mr. Martin Carter? Was he served notice of this hearing? He was served yesterday, Your Honor. He has chosen not to appear. Morrison's expression darkened. I don't appreciate parties ignoring my court. Bailiff, note that Mr. Martin Carter failed to appear despite proper service. He looked back at Brennan. I'm inclined to grant your audit request, but the restraining order is more complicated. If Mr. Carter chooses to contest it, he won't have grounds to contest it if Miss Carter can demonstrate immediate danger to her person and her property. Can she? Yes, Your Honor. Brennan turned slightly. Miss Carter, please approach. Lena's legs felt like water, but she stood and walked to the witness box. The bailiff swore her in and she sat down, her hands gripping the wooden rail to keep them steady. Morrison studied her over his spectacles. Miss Carter, these are serious accusations you're making against your uncle. Do you understand that? Yes, sir. And you're prepared to testify under oath that he defrauded your father's estate and physically assaulted you? Yes, sir. Show me the injuries from the most recent assault. Lena's face burned, but she turned her head so the judge could see the bruise along her jaw, still purple at the edges fading to yellow. Then she held out her arms, where finger-shaped bruises circled both wrists. Morrison's mouth thinned. How long has this been going on? 6 years, sir, since my father died. And you never reported it to the local sheriff? The sheriff is Martin's cousin, sir. They're close. I didn't think... She stopped, swallowed. I didn't think anyone would believe me. Yet you expect me to believe you now. The words hit like a slap. Lena felt her throat close up, felt tears prick at her eyes. She forced them back. I expect you to look at the evidence, sir. The ledger doesn't lie, and these bruises didn't put themselves on my skin. Morrison was silent for a long moment. Then he sighed. Miss Brennan, I'll grant the audit. I'm appointing Samuel Whitmore as independent accountant. He's thorough and he's honest. He'll have access to all estate records and he'll report his findings directly to this court within 30 days. And the restraining order, Your Honor? Granted on a temporary basis. Mr. Martin Carter is prohibited from approaching, contacting, or threatening Miss Carter pending resolution of this matter. He's also prohibited from selling, transferring, or otherwise disposing of any estate assets. Morrison looked at Lena. That means you can't go back to the ranch, Miss Carter. Not until this is settled. Do you have somewhere safe to stay? Yes, sir. A boarding house here in town. Good. Stay there. And if your uncle violates this order, you report it immediately. He banged his gavel. We're adjourned. Next hearing is set for 30 days from today, at which time Mr. Whitmore will present his audit findings. Miss Brennan, make sure your client and Mr. Carter are both properly notified. Yes, Your Honor. Thank you. They filed out of the courtroom in a daze. Lena's ears were ringing, her heart still hammering. She'd done it. Actually done it. Stood up in front of a judge and accused Martin of everything he'd done. And the judge had believed her, or at least believed her enough to order an audit. That went well, Brennan said as they reached the courthouse steps. Better than I expected. Honestly, Morrison's a tough judge, but he's fair, and he clearly didn't appreciate Martin ignoring a court summons. What happens now? Lena asked. Now we wait for the audit. Whitmore's good. He'll find everything. And once he does, Morrison will have no choice but to remove Martin as executor. Brennan pulled on her gloves against the November cold. In the meantime, you need to stay visible. Go to church, shop at the market, let people see you're still here and still standing. Martin's going to try to paint you as hysterical or unstable. Don't give him ammunition. Cole had been quiet through all of this, but now he spoke up. What about the restraining order? How's it enforced? If Martin violates it, Miss Carter reports to the sheriff. The sheriff arrests him and he's held in contempt of court. Brennan's expression was grim. Of course, that assumes the sheriff will actually enforce it. Given what Miss Carter said about their relationship, I'm not confident. So the order's worthless. Not worthless, but not bulletproof either. Brennan looked at Lena. You need to be careful, very careful. Martin's not going to take this lying down. She was right. 2 days later, Lena was at the market buying vegetables when she heard the whispers start. Women turning to stare at her, their voices dropping to hushed murmurs. A merchant she'd bought from before suddenly claimed to be out of stock of everything she needed. By the time she got back to the boarding house, she knew something had changed. Cole was waiting in the hallway outside her room, a newspaper in his hands. His expression told her everything she needed to know before she even looked at the headline. "What is it?" she asked. He handed her the paper. Page 3. Lena found the article halfway down the page. The headline read, "Local Rancher Defends Against Niece's Baseless Accusations." Her hands started shaking before she even finished the first paragraph. The article was written by someone named Thomas Brennan, no relation to Sarah, apparently, and it painted Martin as a devoted uncle who'd sacrificed his own prospects to manage his late brother's estate out of family duty. According to the article, Lena was an emotionally disturbed young woman who'd become obsessed with regaining control of property. She was neither capable nor qualified to manage. The fraud allegations were dismissed as fantastical claims based on misunderstood accounting practices, and the abuse claims were characterized as regrettable discipline necessitated by Miss Carter's increasingly erratic behavior. But the worst part was at the end, where Martin claimed that Lena had run off with a drifter of questionable character and was likely being unduly influenced by this unnamed man. "He's making me sound insane," Lena said quietly, "and making you sound like you're taking advantage of me." "That's exactly what he's doing." Cole took the paper back. "He's getting ahead of the story. Controlling the narrative before the audit can prove anything." "Will people believe him?" "Some will. He's a man. He's established. And you're just a girl making wild accusations." Cole's voice was tight with anger. "It's a smart play, I'll give him that." Lena sank down on the edge of her bed. "Brennan said to stay visible, to let people see me. But if they think I'm crazy, then we prove you're not." Cole crouched in front of her. "We go about our business. We don't hide. And we wait for the audit to come back and show everyone exactly what kind of man your uncle really is. And if the audit takes too long, if Martin convinces everyone I'm lying before Whitmore can finish, then we deal with it." Cole's jaw was set. "But we don't give up. Not now." Lena wanted to believe him, wanted to think that truth would win out over lies, that justice would prevail. But she'd lived with Martin long enough to know how good he was at twisting things, at making himself the victim and everyone else the villain. Still, what choice did she have? She'd already committed, already stood up in front of a judge and told her story. Backing down now would just prove Martin right. So she didn't back down. She went to church on Sunday, sitting in the back pew and ignoring the stares. She shopped at the market, holding her head high even when merchants turned her away. She took meals in the boarding house dining room instead of hiding in her room, and slowly, grudgingly, she started to notice something. Not everyone believed Martin's story. Some people, mostly women, mostly mothers, looked at her bruised wrists and saw something familiar. They didn't say much, just a nod in passing or a tight smile. But it was something. The audit took 3 weeks. 3 long, tense weeks where Lena felt like she was holding her breath waiting for the other shoe to drop. Cole took odd jobs around town to pay for their rooms and meals, refusing to let Lena spend more of her bank money. He worked as a blacksmith's assistant, helped repair a warehouse roof, did whatever work he could find. Lena offered to help, but he shut that down fast. "You stay visible and respectable," he said. "Last thing we need is people thinking you're desperate." So she stayed at the boarding house and tried not to go crazy with waiting. Samuel Whitmore, the accountant, came by once to ask her questions about the ranch operations. He was a small, precise man with wire-rimmed glasses and ink-stained fingers, and he listened to everything she said without judgment or disbelief. "The numbers don't lie," he told her as he was leaving. "Whatever else happens, the numbers will tell the truth." Lena held on to that thought like a lifeline. On the morning of the audit hearing, she woke before dawn with her stomach in knots. Cole was already up, standing by the window, watching the street like he expected trouble. "You sleep at all?" she asked. "Some." He turned to look at her. "You ready for this?" "No, but I'm going anyway." They dressed carefully, Lena in her blue dress again, Cole in the shirt he'd worn to the first hearing. Brennan had sent word that Whitmore would be presenting his findings at 10 o'clock, and that Martin had been properly served and was expected to appear. The courtroom was packed when they arrived. News of the audit had spread, and apparently the idea of a young woman accusing her uncle of fraud was enough to draw a crowd. Lena recognized some faces from town, merchants, ranchers, a few of the church ladies who'd given her those tight smiles. And sitting in the front row on the opposite side of the aisle was Martin. He looked smaller than Lena remembered, older somehow. But when he turned to look at her, his eyes were full of such pure hatred that she actually took a step back. Cole's hand found her elbow, steadying her. "Don't look at him," he said quietly, eyes forward. They took their seats behind Brennan's table. Martin had his own lawyer now, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit who kept whispering in Martin's ear. Judge Morrison entered and everyone stood. He looked tired, Lena thought, like this whole mess was exactly the kind of thing he'd hoped to avoid. "Be seated," Morrison said. "Mr. Whitmore, I understand you've completed your audit of the Robert Carter estate. Please present your findings." Whitmore stood and moved to a podium, bringing with him a stack of papers at least 3 inches thick. He settled his glasses on his nose and began to read. "Your Honor, I was appointed to conduct an independent audit of the Robert Carter estate, currently administered by Martin Carter, as executor. I was given full access to all estate records, bank accounts, and supporting documentation. My findings are as follows." He paused, flipping to a new page. First, regarding income. Between 1880 and 1886, the estate generated approximately $43,000 in gross income from cattle sales, land leases, and other sources. Of this amount, only $28,000 was deposited into estate accounts. The remaining $15,000 is unaccounted for. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Morrison held up a hand for silence. Second, regarding expenses. Mr. Martin Carter recorded total expenses of $32,000 during the same period. However, upon examination of receipts and invoices, actual verifiable expenses totaled only $19,000. The discrepancy of $13,000 appears to have been paid to Mr. Martin Carter himself in the form of salary and personal reimbursements. The murmuring got louder. Martin's lawyer leaned over and whispered urgently in his ear, but Martin just sat there, his face turning red. Third, regarding debts. The estate currently carries approximately $12,000 in outstanding obligations. However, my investigation reveals that these debts were incurred by Mr. Martin Carter for personal expenses including gambling losses, personal loans, and purchases unrelated to ranch operations. None of these debts were authorized by estate guidelines or approved by any court. Whitmore looked up from his papers. "In summary, Your Honor, I find clear and convincing evidence that Mr. Martin Carter has systematically defrauded the Robert Carter estate of approximately $28,000 over a 6-year period. Furthermore, he has incurred personal debts in the estate's name, which, if enforced, would bankrupt the property and leave the rightful heir with nothing." The courtroom erupted. Morrison banged his gavel 3 times before order was restored. "Mr. Carter?" Morrison said, his voice cold as January ice. "Do you have any response to these findings?" Martin's lawyer stood. "Your Honor, my client disputes these allegations in the strongest possible terms. The accounting practices in question were standard for rural estate management, and any discrepancies can be explained by—" "I asked your client, counselor, not you." Morrison's gaze didn't waver from Martin. "Mr. Carter, stand up and address this court." Martin stood slowly, his hands gripping the table in front of him. "Those numbers are wrong," he said, his voice shaking. "That girl, my niece, she doesn't understand how a ranch works. There are expenses, losses, things that don't show up clean in the books." "Mr. Whitmore is a certified accountant with 20 years of experience, Mr. Carter. Are you suggesting he doesn't understand basic arithmetic?" "I'm saying he's been fooled. She fooled him, just like she's trying to fool you. That girl is Careful." Morrison's voice dropped to a dangerous level. "Very careful about what you say next." Martin's mouth snapped shut. He stood there breathing hard, his face purple with rage, and Lena could see him calculating, trying to figure out if there was any play left, any angle he could work. There wasn't. Morrison turned to Whitmore. "Your audit is entered into evidence. The court accepts your findings as accurate and complete." He looked at Brennan. "Miss Brennan, I assume you have a motion?" Brennan stood. "Yes, Your Honor. I move for the immediate removal of Martin Carter as executor of the Robert Carter estate, the appointment of my client, Lena Carter, as sole administrator, and the transfer of all estate assets to her control. Additionally, I move that all debts incurred by Martin Carter be declared his personal responsibility and not obligations of the estate." "Granted on all counts." Morrison didn't even pause. "Mr. Martin Carter, you are hereby removed as executor effective immediately. You are ordered to turn over all estate records, keys, accounts, and assets to Miss Lena Carter within 48 hours. Furthermore, you are personally liable for all debts incurred in the estate's name, and creditors are hereby notified that they must pursue collection from you individually, not from estate property. Martin made a choking sound. His lawyer put a hand on his arm, but Martin shook it off. You can't do this, Martin said. That's my property. I've been running that place for 6 years. You've been stealing from that place for 6 years. Morrison's voice cut like a blade. And you're fortunate I'm not referring this matter to the territorial prosecutor for criminal charges. As it stands, you're to have no contact with Miss Carter, no access to the ranch property, and if you so much as ride past the property line, I'll have you arrested for trespassing. Am I clear? You're making a mistake. Bailiff, remove Mr. Carter from my courtroom. The bailiff moved forward, but Martin was already backing toward the door, his face twisted with fury. This isn't over, he said, looking directly at Lena. You hear me, girl? This isn't over. One more word and I'll hold you in contempt, Morrison said. Get out. Martin left, his lawyer hurrying after him. The courtroom buzzed with excited conversation, but Lena barely heard it. She sat frozen in her seat, unable to quite believe what had just happened. She'd won. Actually won. The ranch was hers, the debts were Martin's, and she was free. Miss Carter? Morrison's voice broke through her daze. Approach the bench, please. Lena stood on shaking legs and walked forward. Up close, Morrison looked less stern and more tired. You've been through quite an ordeal, he said quietly. And I want you to understand something. The law has given you control of your property, but that doesn't mean your troubles are over. Your uncle still has powerful friends, and men like him don't take defeat well. You're going to need to be smart and careful. Do you understand? Yes, sir. Good. Morrison pulled out a document and signed it with a flourish. This is the court order transferring the estate to your control. Take it to the county clerk and have it recorded. Then take it to your bank and have the accounts transferred to your name. After that, I suggest you hire some help, reliable help, and make sure that ranch is secure before your uncle decides to cause more trouble. I will, sir. Thank you. Morrison's expression softened slightly. Your father was a good man. He'd be proud of you for fighting back. He handed her the document. Now go take care of your property. Lena took the paper with trembling hands and walked back to where Cole and Brennan were waiting. The moment she reached them, her legs finally gave out. Cole caught her before she hit the floor, his arms steady around her. Easy, he said. I've got you. I can't believe it, Lena whispered. It's over. It's actually over. Not quite over, Brennan said, but she was smiling. You still need to take possession of the ranch and deal with those creditors, but the hard part's done. You won. They left the courthouse together, stepping out into cold December sunlight. The street was busy, people going about their business, and for the first time in 6 years, Lena felt like she was one of them. Not invisible, not trapped, just a person with a future stretching out ahead of her. What now? Cole asked. Lena looked at the court order in her hands, then at the boarding house where they'd been hiding for a month, then at the road that led west toward the ranch. Her ranch. Now we go home, she said. They packed their few belongings and settled their bill at the boarding house, then headed to the livery stable where they'd been keeping their horses. The stable owner, a grizzled old man named Henderson, looked up as they entered. Heard what happened at the courthouse, he said. Whole town's talking about it. What are they saying? Lena asked. Henderson shrugged. Some say you're brave, some say you're crazy. Most are just shocked a girl your age stood up to Martin Carter and won. He pulled their horses from the stalls. For what it's worth, I think your daddy would have been proud. Thank you. They rode out of Cheyenne an hour later, the winter sun already sinking toward the horizon. It was a 2-day ride back to the ranch, maybe 3 if the weather turned bad. Lena didn't care. She was going home. That night, they camped in the same draw where they'd stopped on the way to Cheyenne weeks ago. It felt like a lifetime had passed since then. Back then, Lena had been desperate and scared, gambling everything on a long shot. Now she was the legal owner of her own property, free from Martin's control. But Morrison's warning echoed in her head. Men like Martin didn't take defeat well. And Martin still had friends, still had connections. The court had ruled in her favor, but that didn't mean Martin would just accept it and walk away. You're thinking too loud, Cole said from across the fire. Lena looked up. What? You've got that expression, The one that means you're worrying about 10 things at once. Can you blame me? Martin threatened me in open court. You really think he's just going to let this go? No. Cole poked at the fire with a stick. But worrying about what he might do won't change anything. We deal with problems when they show up, not before. That's easy for you to say. No, it's not. Cole's voice was quiet. I spent 3 years looking over my shoulder, waiting for the men who ran me out of Colorado to show up and finish the job. All that worrying didn't keep me safer. It just made me miserable. Lena pulled her blanket tighter. So what do I do? Just pretend everything's fine? You prepare. You get the ranch secured, hire some hands you can trust, make sure you've got witnesses around if Martin tries anything. Cole met her eyes across the fire. And you remember that you're not alone in this. Not anymore. Something warm settled in Lena's chest at those words. For 6 years she'd been alone, fighting a battle she couldn't win. Now she had Cole and Brennan, and a court order that said the ranch was legally hers. It wasn't much, but it was more than she'd had yesterday. They reached the ranch late the following afternoon, the buildings dark against the winter sky. Everything looked exactly the same. The barn with its patched roof, the house with its sagging porch, the corrals where the cattle stood waiting. But it felt different. Because this time, Lena wasn't arriving as a prisoner. She was arriving as the owner. They dismounted in the yard and Lena just stood there for a moment, looking at the place her father had built. The place Martin had nearly destroyed. Her place now, for better or worse. You all right? Cole asked. Yeah. Lena squared her shoulders. Let's see what kind of mess we're walking into. The house was unlocked, which was the first sign of trouble. Lena pushed through the front door and stopped dead. The place had been ransacked. Furniture overturned, drawers pulled out and dumped on the floor, cabinet doors hanging open. In the kitchen, dishes were smashed. In the office, papers were scattered everywhere. He was looking for something, Cole said, surveying the damage. The ledger. Lena picked her way through the debris. He must have figured out I gave it to Brennan, but he was looking anyway. They moved through the house room by room. Lena's room had been hit the worst. Her mattress slashed open, her clothes torn from the wardrobe and thrown around. Her mother's jewelry box was gone. The photograph of her parents smashed. Lena stood in the middle of the destruction and felt rage build in her chest. Hot and righteous and clean. He did this on purpose, she said quietly. He wanted me to see it. Wanted me to know that even if he couldn't have the ranch, he could still hurt me. Probably. Cole righted an overturned chair. But he's gone now, and we can fix this. Could they? Lena looked around at the wreckage of her childhood home and wasn't sure, but Cole was already moving, already picking up pieces and setting things to rights, and after a moment she joined him. They worked until dark, putting furniture back in place, sweeping up broken glass, salvaging what could be saved. It wasn't perfect. There were gaps where things were missing, holes where Martin had taken his anger out on the walls. But by the time they stopped for the night, the house at least looked habitable. Lena made a simple dinner from supplies in the cold box that Martin hadn't destroyed, bread and cheese and some dried meat. They ate in silence, both too tired for conversation. I should check the barn, Cole said as he finished eating. Make sure he didn't do damage out there, too. I'll come with you. The barn was in better shape than the house, probably because Martin had been in too much of a hurry to be thorough. A few tools were missing and some tack had been cut up, but nothing that couldn't be replaced. They were heading back to the house when they saw the horse. It was standing at the edge of the yard, barely visible in the moonlight. A big bay gelding with a white blaze. And sitting in the saddle was Martin. Lena froze. Cole's hand went to his knife. Thought you might be back by now, Martin called. His voice was slurred, drunk probably, or close to it. Came to see my property one last time before that bitch lawyer steals it from me. It's not your property, Lena said, proud that her voice didn't shake. The court said, I don't give a damn what the court said. That ranch was mine by right. I ran it for 6 years while you sat around playing the victim. Martin swayed in the saddle. You think you can manage this place? You're just a stupid girl. You'll run it into the ground inside a year. Maybe, Lena took a step forward, but it'll be my ground to run into, not yours. Martin's hand dropped to something at his belt. A gun. You took everything from me. My income, my reputation, my future. That judge made me look like a fool in front of the whole town. You did that yourself, Cole said quietly, by stealing and lying and beating on someone who couldn't fight back. Nobody asked you, Drifter. Martin pulled the gun, the metal gleaming in the moonlight. I should have killed you when I had the chance. Put the gun away, Martin. Lena's heart was hammering, but she kept her voice level. You're drunk and you're angry and you're about to do something you can't take back. Can't I? Martin laughed, ugly and bitter. I already lost everything. What's one more sin on the pile? He raised the gun, pointing it directly at Lena's chest, and Cole moved. He was fast, faster than Lena would have thought possible. One moment he was standing beside her, the next he was launching himself at Martin's horse. The gelding reared, startled, and Martin's shot went wide, the bullet kicking up dirt 3 feet to Lena's left. Cole grabbed Martin's leg and pulled hard. Martin came off the horse with a yell, hitting the ground heavy. The gun flew from his hand and skittered across the packed earth. Lena dove for it. Her fingers closed around cold metal just as Martin rolled to his feet. He was bigger than Cole, heavier, and drunk mean in a way that made him dangerous. He swung wild and caught Cole across the jaw, sending him stumbling backward. Stop! Lena shouted. She raised the gun, her hand shaking so hard she could barely hold it. Stop right now or I'll shoot! Martin turned to look at her, breathing hard. Blood trickled from his split lip. You won't. You don't have the guts. Try me. For a long moment they stood there, the gun heavy in Lena's hands, Martin swaying on his feet. Cole pushed himself upright, his jaw already swelling. Then Martin laughed. You're pathetic, both of you, hiding behind lawyers and guns because you're too weak to fight fair. He spat blood into the dirt. You deserve each other. He turned and caught his horse's reins, pulling himself back into the saddle with visible effort. This isn't over, he said, echoing his words from the courtroom. I don't care what that judge says. This ranch should be mine, and I'm going to make sure you never get a moment's peace on it. He kicked the horse into a gallop and disappeared into the darkness. Lena stood there with the gun still raised, her whole body shaking now that the danger had passed. Cole came to stand beside her and gently took the weapon from her hands. You all right? He asked. No. Lena's legs gave out and she sat down hard in the dirt. He's right. This isn't over. He's going to keep coming back, keep making threats, keep trying to take this place from me. Let him try. Cole checked the gun, still had 4 bullets, and tucked it into his belt. He shows up here again. He's trespassing. We can have him arrested. You think the sheriff will arrest his own cousin? If we make enough noise, he won't have a choice. Cole offered her a hand and pulled her to her feet. Come on, let's get inside and lock the doors. We'll figure out the rest in the morning. But Lena knew there wouldn't be any figuring out. Martin had made his position clear. He wasn't going to accept the court's ruling. Wasn't going to walk away and let her have what was legally hers, which meant this fight was far from over. It started over again the next morning before the sun was even up. Lena woke to the sound of cattle bawling in distress, a sound that cut through the pre-dawn silence like a knife. She was on her feet and moving before she was fully conscious, grabbing her coat and boots. Cole was already outside when she stumbled onto the porch, standing in the yard with his back to her, looking toward the north pasture. Even in the gray half-light, she could see the tension in his shoulders. What is it? She called. The fence is down. North side. Cattle are scattered all over hell and gone. Lena's stomach dropped. The north fence bordered open range. If the cattle got out there, it would take days to round them up. Days they didn't have with winter coming on. They saddled the horses in record time and rode out toward the damage. What they found was worse than Lena had imagined. A 50-foot section of fence had been cut clean through, the wire snipped and the posts pulled up, and their cattle, maybe 70 head, were already a quarter-mile out, drifting steadily away from the ranch. This wasn't an accident, Cole said flatly. He dismounted and examined the cut wire. These are fresh, done sometime in the last few hours. Martin, probably, or someone he paid. Cole swung back into the saddle. We need to get those cattle back before they scatter any further. You go left, I'll go right. We'll try to turn them back toward the gap. They worked through the morning, pushing reluctant cattle back toward the ranch. It was hard, frustrating work. The animals were spooked and kept trying to break away, and there were only 2 of them to do the job that should have taken 4 or 5 hands. By the time they got the last steer back through the gap, Lena was exhausted and the sun was high overhead. Cole started repairing the fence while Lena rode back to get tools and fresh wire. When she returned, he had the posts reset and was working on stringing new wire. "This is going to keep happening," she said, handing him the wire cutters. "He's going to keep sabotaging us until we can't keep up anymore." "I know." "So what do we do?" Cole twisted the wire tight around a post before answering. "We hire help, real help, not just me. We get enough people around here that Martin can't pull this kind of thing without getting caught." "With what money?" "The estate account is almost empty. Martin bled it dry, remember? And what's left needs to go toward paying down those debts before the creditors start seizing assets." "What about the money from your bank account? You've got $500 left after paying Brennan." Lena shook her head. "That's for emergencies. For feed if we have a bad winter. For supplies we can't do without. I start spending it on wages and we'll be broke by spring. Then we need another source of income. Fast." Cole moved to the next post. "What about selling some of the cattle? Take a dozen head to market, use the proceeds to hire hands and buy supplies." "The market's terrible right now. Prices are down because of the early snow. We'd barely get enough to cover expenses, let alone pay wages." They worked in silence for a while, the only sound the creak of wire and the distant lowing of cattle. Lena's mind churned through possibilities and kept coming up empty. Every solution required money they didn't have, or time they couldn't spare. "There might be another way," Cole said eventually, "but you're not going to like it. Try me. We run a cattle drive. Take everything we can spare to the railhead in Rawlins, cut out the local buyers entirely, and sell direct to the big packers. The prices are better, and we can move more volume." Lena stared at him. "Rawlins is 150 miles from here, through mountain passes that'll be snowed in by the time we get organized. And it takes at least 6 men to move a herd that size safely." "I know. So how are we supposed to manage it with just the 2 of us?" "We're not. We find 4 more riders willing to work for a percentage of the sale instead of wages up front." Cole finished with the wire and tested the tension. "It's a risk, but if we pull it off, we could clear enough money to pay down the debts, hire permanent help, and make it through the winter." "And if we don't pull it off?" "Then we lose everything trying." Lena looked out across the pasture at the cattle they'd just spent all morning rounding up. Her cattle now, legally and truly. Worth maybe $4,000 if they could get them to market. Worth nothing if they stayed here while Martin picked them off piece by piece. "All right," she said, let's do it." Finding riders turned out to be harder than finding money. Word had spread about Lena's fight with Martin, and most of the available hands in the territory weren't interested in getting caught in the middle of a family feud. The few who were interested wanted wages up front, which Lena couldn't afford. They spent 3 days riding to neighboring ranches and small towns, asking around. The responses ranged from polite refusals to outright hostility. One rancher, a friend of Martin's it turned out, actually laughed in Lena's face. "You think you're going to run a cattle drive?" he said. "Girl, you can't even run a household. Why don't you sell that place to someone who knows what they're doing and find yourself a husband?" Lena had walked away before she said something she'd regret. But Cole hadn't walked away. He'd stayed long enough to make it clear that if the rancher ever spoke to Lena that way again, there'd be consequences. They were about ready to give up when they met Thomas Chen. He was working at a lumber mill outside of Laramie, a man in his mid-20s with strong hands and a quiet way of speaking. Cole struck up a conversation with him while Lena was asking the mill owner about available workers, and by the time she came back empty-handed, Cole had a thoughtful expression on his face. "This is Thomas Chen," Cole said. "He's worked cattle drives before down in Texas." Thomas nodded at Lena. "Ma'am, what are you doing working at a lumber mill if you know cattle?" Lena asked. "Needed steady wages? Drive work is seasonal." Thomas's English had a slight accent underneath, careful and precise. "But I heard what you said to the owner about needing riders for a percentage deal. You'd be interested?" "Depends on the percentage." They talked terms over coffee at a nearby boarding house. Thomas was honest about his situation. He'd come west from California after losing his family's laundry business to a fire. Had worked his way up from camp cook to drover on the big Texas drives. He knew cattle, knew the country, and most importantly, he didn't care about Lena's age or her dispute with Martin. "Money's money," he said simply. "You pay fair, I work fair. That's the deal." 10% of the net sale, Lena offered. "Same as Cole's getting. We sell the herd for $4,000, you walk away with $400. And if the herd doesn't sell? Then none of us make anything. That's the risk. Thomas considered this, then nodded. I'll do it. But you need more than just 3 riders. You need at least 5, maybe 6. Any less and you're asking to lose half the herd to rustlers or weather. Can you find them? Maybe. I know some people. Other men who've had trouble finding work. Thomas met her eyes. Chinese, mostly, or mixed. Men that white ranchers won't hire but who know their business. Lena didn't hesitate. If they can ride and they'll work for percentage, I don't care if they're purple. Bring them. Thomas brought 3 men. The first was his cousin James Chen, who'd worked the same Texas drives and had a reputation as one of the best ropers in the territory. The second was a half Shoshone man named Samuel Black Elk, who knew the mountain passes better than anyone and could track a single steer through a blizzard. The third was a kid named Miguel Santos, who couldn't have been more than 17, but who swore he'd been working cattle since he could walk. They met at the ranch on a cold morning in late November. Lena looked at her crew, 5 men and herself, and tried not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. All right, she said. Here's the situation. We've got maybe 160 head fit for the drive. We need to get them to Rawlins before the passes close for winter. That's 150 miles through rough country and bad weather. We're looking at 10 days minimum, maybe 2 weeks if we hit snow. What's the route? Samuel asked. North to the Sweetwater, follow it west to South Pass, then drop down to Rawlins. Cole had a map spread out on the kitchen table. There's water most of the way, and decent grazing if we don't push too hard. South Pass will be the problem, Thomas said. This time of year could be snowed in. Could be. But it's the fastest route and the safest for the cattle. The alternative is going around through the low country, which adds a week we don't have, and leaves us exposed to rustlers for that much longer, James added. They spent the rest of the day planning, dividing up responsibilities, figuring out what supplies they needed, calculating how much food and grain to pack. By the time they finished, Lena's head was spinning with details. That night she found Cole in the barn, checking over the pack saddles. You really think we can do this? She asked. We don't have a choice. This ranch doesn't survive without money, and we're not getting money any other way. He looked up from his work. But yeah, I think we can do it. These are good men. They know their business. They're taking a huge risk. If we fail, they get nothing. They know that. They're here anyway. Cole went back to his saddle inspection. Says something about you that they're willing to gamble on a girl they just met. Says something about how desperate they are, more like. Maybe. Or maybe they see the same thing I saw when I first rode in here. Someone who's tougher than they look and not willing to quit. Lena felt heat rise to her face. I've quit plenty of times. In my head, anyway. But you never did it for real. That's what counts. Cole finished with the saddle and straightened up. Get some sleep. We move out at first light. They left the ranch 3 days later with 162 head of cattle, 6 riders, and supplies for 2 weeks. The morning was bitter cold, frost thick on the ground, and Lena's breath came out in clouds as she helped Samuel and Miguel get the herd moving. It was chaos at first. Cattle scattered in 3 directions, riders shouting and horses dancing sideways. But slowly, painfully, they got the herd pointed north and moving at a steady walk. Lena had never been on a cattle drive before. She'd helped her father move cattle between pastures, but this was different. This was 160 animals with minds of their own, all trying to go in different directions at once. Her job was riding drag, the back of the herd, eating dust and chasing down strays. By noon, her throat was raw and her legs ached from the saddle. By evening, she was so tired she could barely dismount when they finally stopped for the night. Thomas took first watch while the others set up camp. Lena collapsed by the fire and accepted a plate of beans from Miguel without even tasting them. First day's always the worst, Cole said, settling beside her. Gets easier once the cattle settle into the rhythm. When does that happen? 3-4 days usually, Lena groaned. I'm not going to survive 3 days of this. Yes, you will. You're tougher than you think. She wanted to argue but didn't have the energy. Instead, she ate her beans and stared at the fire, listening to the cattle settling down for the night and the wind picking up across the prairie. The next morning was worse. Every muscle in Lena's body screamed protest as she climbed back into the saddle, but the herd moved out more smoothly than the day before, and by mid-morning, they'd covered 5 miles. They fell into a routine. Wake before dawn, eat a quick breakfast, Move the herd until noon, rest during the heat of the day, move again until dark. Set up camp, eat dinner, assign watch rotation, sleep, then do it all over again. The weather held for the first 4 days. Cold but clear, with just enough wind to keep the dust from being unbearable. They made good time, covering 15 miles a day, and the cattle started to settle. On the 5th day, they reached the Sweetwater River and followed it west. The country here was rougher, with rocky outcrops and patches of timber that made it harder to keep the herd together. They lost 6 head the first day, steers that wandered off into the trees and disappeared before anyone could bring them back. "We can't afford to keep losing cattle," Lena said that night. "Every head we lose is money we won't have at the end." "Then we need tighter control," Thomas said. 2 riders on each flank, one on point, one on drag. Keep them bunched closer even if it slows us down. They tried it the next day and lost only 1 steer. The day after that, they didn't lose any. On the 8th day, the weather changed. Lena woke to find the world turned white. Snow was falling steadily, already an inch thick on the ground and showing no signs of stopping. The cattle were restless, bawling, and trying to drift south away from the wind. "How far to South Pass?" she asked Samuel, who'd ridden this route before. "Maybe 20 miles, 2 days in good weather." Samuel looked at the sky. "In this? Could be 3 or 4. "We don't have 3 or 4 days. We push through." "Push through a blizzard with 150 head of cattle?" James shook his head. "That's suicide." "It's suicide to stop. If we hole up and wait this out, the pass could be snowed in completely. Then we're stuck on this side until spring." Lena looked around at the crew. "I'm not saying it's a good option. I'm saying it's the only option we've got." Cole backed her up. "She's right. We either make it through the pass in the next 2 days, or we turn around and go home with nothing." They pushed on through the snow. It was brutal, miserable work. The cattle didn't want to move into the wind, kept trying to turn back. The riders had to stay right on top of them, constantly pushing, constantly fighting. Visibility dropped to maybe 50 feet, then 30, then barely 20. By afternoon, Lena couldn't feel her fingers or her feet. She kept moving because stopping meant freezing, kept the cattle moving because that was the job. Beside her, Miguel looked half dead in the saddle, but he didn't complain. They made maybe 8 miles that first day. When they finally stopped for the night, everyone was too exhausted to do more than huddle around a fire and force down some food. "We're not going to make it," Miguel said quietly. "The pass is still 12 miles away and the snow's getting worse." "We'll make it," Lena said. She didn't believe it, but saying otherwise felt like giving up. Samuel came back from checking the herd with bad news. "Lost count in the snow, but I think we're down at least 10 head, maybe more. They wandered off and I couldn't track them." 10 head, $400 minimum, gone into the storm. Lena felt the loss like a physical blow. "We keep going," she said. "First light, we move." But first light brought worse weather. The snow was coming down so thick you couldn't see 10 feet. And the wind was howling like something alive and angry. The cattle were bunched tight, refusing to move. "We have to stop," Thomas said. "This is too dangerous. We lose the herd in this, and we're done." "If we stop, we're done anyway." Lena's voice came out sharper than she intended. "The pass is right there. 1 more day, and we're through. 1 more day in this weather, and we'll all be dead." Thomas met her eyes. "I signed on for a risky drive, not a suicide run. We need to make camp and wait this out." "I agree with Thomas," James said. "I've been through blizzards like this. You keep moving, you die. Simple as that." Lena looked at Cole. "What do you think?" "I think we're stuck either way. But I'd rather be stuck alive than dead." It was 4 against 2. Her and Samuel were the only ones willing to keep pushing. And maybe they were wrong. Maybe this was suicide. But the thought of turning back after coming this far, of losing everything because of some snow. "All right," she said finally. "We make camp. But the second the weather clears, we move. No delays." They found a sheltered spot in a stand of trees and set up a rough camp. The cattle clustered together for warmth, and the riders took turns keeping watch to make sure none wandered off. The storm lasted 2 days. 2 days of sitting in the cold, burning through their supplies, watching the snow pile higher and higher. 2 days of not knowing if the pass was already snowed shut, if they'd missed their window, if this whole thing had been for nothing. On the morning of the 3rd day, the storm broke. The sun came out weak and pale, and the world was buried under 3 feet of fresh snow.
Pass is going to be hell, Samuel said, staring up at the mountains. But it's probably still open. Barely. They moved out within the hour, pushing the cattle through snow up to their hocks. It was slow going, maybe 2 miles an hour at best, but they were moving.
By late afternoon, they reached the base of South Pass. The trail up was visible as a narrow cut through the snow, steep and treacherous. Lena looked at it and felt her courage waver. "One at a time," Samuel said. "We string them out, keep them moving steady. If they spook or bunch up, we'll have a stampede down the mountain." "How long to get them all through?" Lena asked. 4 hours, maybe 5. The sun was already sinking toward the horizon. In 5 hours, it would be full dark. "Then we better get started," Cole said. They worked through the sunset and into the night, pushing cattle up that narrow trail by moonlight. Lena rode point with Samuel, breaking trail through the snow, while the others kept the herd moving from behind. It was terrifying. The trail was barely wide enough for 2 cattle side by side, with drop-offs on both sides that disappeared into darkness. One wrong step, one spooked animal, and they'd lose a dozen head over the edge. But somehow, impossibly, they made it work. Steer by steer, they pushed the herd up and over the pass. When the last animal finally crested the top and started down the western slope, Lena wanted to collapse with relief. "How many did we lose?" she asked James, who'd been counting. 11, plus the 10 from the storm and the 6 from the timber. We're down to 135 head. 27 cattle lost, over $1,000 gone, but they still had a herd and they were through the pass. "How far to Rawlins?" Lena asked. "Maybe 40 miles. 3 days if the weather holds." The weather held. They made it to Rawlins 4 days later, the herd trail-worn but intact. The town was smaller than Cheyenne, rougher around the edges, built around the railroad that would carry cattle and sheep and timber east to the big markets. Lena had never seen so many people in one place. The stockyards were packed with cattle from a dozen different ranches, all waiting for buyers from the big packing houses to make their rounds. "We're late in the season," Thomas observed. "Most of the drives finished a month ago. That could work for us or against us." "How so?" "For us if the packers need more cattle to fill their quotas. Against us if they're already bought up and not interested." They penned their cattle in one of the holding yards and went to find the buyers. Lena let Cole and Thomas do most of the talking. She was too tired and too filthy to present well, and she knew it. The first buyer they found was a man named Kirkland who worked for one of the big Chicago packing houses. He walked through their herd with a critical eye, checking teeth and hooves and running his hands over flanks. "Fair to middling quality," he said when he finished. "Nothing special, but nothing wrong either. I can go $30 a head." "Market rate's 40, Cole said. "Market rate was 40 a month ago. It's dropped since then. Too much supply, not enough demand." Kirkland pulled out a notepad. $30 a head. Take it or leave it." Lena did the math in her head. $30 times 135 head was $4,050. Minus 10% each for Thomas, James, Samuel, Miguel, and Cole. That was $2,025 walking out the door in wages, leaving her with about $2,000. Not enough. Not nearly enough to pay down the debts and keep the ranch running through winter. "We'll think about it," she said. They talked to 2 more buyers. One offered $28 a head. The other offered $32, but only for the best 50 head. He'd pass on the rest entirely. "We're running out of options," Thomas said that evening as they sat in a cheap boarding house counting their remaining money. "Tomorrow's the last day before the buying season ends for the winter. After that, we're stuck here until spring." "What if we hold out?" Lena asked. "Wait until spring when prices go back up. We can't afford to hold them that long. Feed and pen fees would eat up any profit." Cole rubbed his eyes. "We take Kirkland's $30 and cut our losses." Lena wanted to argue, but the numbers didn't lie. $30 a head was better than nothing, and nothing was what they'd have if they waited much longer. "All right," she said. "We sell tomorrow, $30 a head." But when they went back to Kirkland the next morning, they found him standing in their holding pen with another man, older, well-dressed, with the kind of face that said he was used to getting what he wanted. "Miss Carter," Kirkland said when he saw them approach. "This is Mr. Harrison Price. He's interested in your cattle." Price looked at Lena with barely concealed skepticism. "You're the one who brought this herd in?" "I am. Impressive. Long way from Wyoming in this weather. Price walked along the fence, studying the cattle. I represent the Western Stockmen's Association. We're a collective of smaller packing houses that pool resources to compete with the big Chicago outfits. I'm authorized to offer $35 a head for the entire herd. Lena's heart jumped. 35? Cash on delivery. You sign the papers today, you'll have money by tomorrow morning. It was almost too good to be true. Lena looked at Cole, who gave a small nod. Looked at Thomas, who was already calculating numbers in his head. We'll take it, Lena said. They signed the papers that afternoon in Price's office above a dry goods store. Lena's hand shook as she wrote her name on the sale documents, but when it was done and Price handed over a bank draft for $4,725, she felt like she could breathe for the first time in weeks. Pleasure doing business, Price said. If you've got cattle to sell next year, come find me first. I like working with people who keep their word. They walked out of the office into the cold December afternoon, and Lena just stood there on the boardwalk, staring at the paper in her hands. We did it, she said quietly. We actually did it. You did it, Cole corrected. This was your plan, your risk. Our risk? Lena looked at the crew. Thomas, James, Samuel, Miguel, all of them watching her with expressions somewhere between exhausted and proud. We all took the gamble. We all earned this. She divided up the money that night, giving each man his 10% as promised. They'd earned it, every penny, and she didn't begrudge them $1. What was left, just over $2,800, was hers. It wasn't a fortune. It wouldn't solve all her problems or pay off all the debts. But it was enough. Enough to keep the ranch running through winter. Enough to hire help in the spring. Enough to prove that she could do this, could run her father's ranch and make it work. They left Rawlins the next morning, the crew splitting up to head their separate ways. Thomas and James were going back to Laramie, Samuel was heading north to visit family, and Miguel had talked about trying his luck in Colorado. You need riders in the spring, Thomas said, as they prepared to part ways. You know where to find us. I'll remember that, Lena promised. She and Cole rode back toward the ranch alone, the journey taking a week through snow-covered country. It should have felt lonely after having the crew around, but instead it felt peaceful. Like the worst was finally over and now they could catch their breath. They were 3 days out from home when they saw the smoke. At first Lena thought she was imagining it, a dark smudge against the gray winter sky. Too far away to be sure, but as they got closer, the smudge became a column, thick and black and unmistakable. That's coming from the direction of your ranch, Cole said quietly. Lena kicked her horse into a gallop. They covered the last 10 miles at a run, the horses blowing hard by the time they crested the final rise. And there, spread out below them, was what was left of the Carter Ranch. The barn was gone, burned down to the foundation. The house was still standing, but the porch was charred, and half the roof had caved in. The corrals were smashed, the fences torn down. And standing in the middle of the destruction, waiting like he'd known they'd come, was Martin. He had 5 men with him, all of them armed. All of them looking like the kind of rough-hired help you could find in any saloon if you had enough money and no scruples. Lena pulled her horse to a stop at the edge of the yard. Her hands were shaking, but she kept them steady on the reins. "What did you do?" she asked, her voice surprisingly calm. Martin smiled. It was the ugliest thing Lena had ever seen. "I did what I should have done months ago. I burned you out, and now you've got nothing. I've got the land. The court said—" "I don't care what the court said." Martin took a step forward. "This land was supposed to be mine. Your father promised it to me, and I'm taking it back. The court won't let you wait. The court's not here. It's just you and me and the truth." Martin's hand dropped to the gun at his hip. "And the truth is, you're not getting off this property alive." Cole's hand went to his own gun, but he was outnumbered 5-1. Even if he was fast, and Lena suspected he was, there was no way he could take all of them. "You kill us, you'll hang," Lena said. "Murder's still murder, even out here. Not if there's no witnesses. Not if it looks like you died trying to salvage a burning ranch and got caught in the collapse." Martin gestured to the ruined house. "Tragic accident. No one will question it." Lena's mind raced. They were trapped. No help coming. No way to fight. Martin had finally played his last card, and it was a winning hand. Unless. "You want the ranch that bad?" Lena asked. "Fine. You can have it." Everyone froze. Cole looked at her like she'd lost her mind. Martin's smile widened. "What's the catch?" Martin asked. "No catch. I'm tired of fighting you, tired of watching everything fall apart. You win." Lena dismounted slowly, keeping her hands visible. "But I want safe passage, for me and Cole. We walk away, you never come after us, and the ranch is yours." Martin considered this. "You'll sign papers? Make it legal?" "I'll sign whatever you want, tomorrow, in front of a lawyer." Lena took a step forward. "But tonight, we leave, and you let us go." Martin looked at his hired men, then back at Lena. She could see him calculating, trying to figure out what the trick was. There was no trick. Lena was giving up, just like he'd always wanted. Surrendering the fight, surrendering the land, surrendering everything. Or at least, that's what she needed him to believe. "All right," Martin said finally. "You can go, but you leave now. Don't take anything from the house. Don't stop for supplies. Just get on your horses and ride." "Fine." Lena climbed back into the saddle. "You'll have your papers tomorrow." She and Cole rode away slowly, not looking back, until the ranch disappeared behind them. Only then did Lena let herself breathe. "What the hell was that?" Cole demanded. "You're just giving up? After everything, I'm not giving up." Lena pulled her horse to a stop. "I'm buying time. Tomorrow morning we ride to the county seat. We file charges against Martin for arson and destruction of property. We get the sheriff, a different sheriff, not the local one, to arrest him and his hired guns. And while he's sitting in jail, I petition the court to have him declared legally insane and incompetent." Cole stared at her. "You think that'll work? He just burned down a barn and tried to kill us to get land he doesn't legally own. A man who does that isn't sane. And if he's not sane, the court can declare him incompetent and strip him of any claim to the estate permanently." Lena met Cole's eyes. "I'm not giving up the ranch. I'm taking it back. For good this time." A slow smile spread across Cole's face. "You know, you're a lot smarter than you look." "I'm going to take that as a compliment." It was meant as one. They rode through the night toward the county seat, cold and exhausted but grimly determined. Behind them, Martin was probably celebrating his victory. By tomorrow he'd realize it was hollow. And by the day after that, he'd be in jail where he belonged. They reached the county seat by mid-morning, the horses exhausted and Lena so cold she'd stopped feeling her feet hours ago. The town was called Bridger's Point, a collection of maybe 200 buildings clustered around a courthouse that looked newer than everything else. Cole went straight to the sheriff's office while Lena found Sarah Brennan. The lawyer was surprised to see her, but listened without interrupting as Lena laid out everything that had happened. The cattle drive, the money, the burned ranch, Martin's attempt to force her surrender. When Lena finished, Brennan sat back in her chair and was quiet for a long moment. "This changes everything," she said finally. "Arson is a felony. Attempted murder is a felony. If we can prove Martin did this, we can prove it. He was standing right there in the middle of the destruction with 5 hired men. He admitted it to our faces. Your testimony and Cole's testimony, against Martin's denial and whatever story his men tell." Brennan tapped her pen against her desk. "It's enough to get an arrest warrant, maybe even enough to get a conviction if the judge believes you. But Martin still has friends in this territory. We need to be strategic." "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking we hit him with everything at once. Criminal charges, civil suit for damages, petition to have him declared incompetent. We bury him in legal action until he can't fight back anymore." Brennan pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and started writing. "But first we need him arrested, and we need to make sure he stays arrested until trial." The sheriff at Bridger's Point was a man named William Cross, gray-haired and hard-eyed in a way that suggested he'd seen his share of trouble. He listened to Lena's story with his arms crossed, then looked at the affidavit Brennan had drawn up. "Martin Carter," he said. "I know the name. Thought he was over in your part of the territory. He is, but he burned down my barn and tried to kill me last night. That makes it your jurisdiction if he crosses into this county." Lena met his gaze without flinching. "I need you to arrest him before he disappears or comes after me again." Cross studied her for a long moment. "You're the girl who took him to court. The fraud case." "Yes, sir."
"Heard about that." Caused quite a stir. Cross unfolded the affidavit and read it more carefully. "Says here he had 5 men with him. You get their names?" "No, sir, But they'll be with him if you move fast. And if I don't move fast, then he'll scatter them and claim he was nowhere near my ranch when it burned. And I'll be back where I started, except this time with no barn and half a house. Cross grunted. I'll need a warrant. Judge Wilson's in court this morning, but I can get you in front of him by noon. If he signs it, I'll ride out with a posse this afternoon. It wasn't perfect. It gave Martin hours to cover his tracks, but it was better than nothing. Judge Wilson turned out to be younger than Morrison, maybe 45, with sharp eyes and a reputation for being fair but tough. He read through Brennan's petition and the criminal complaint, then looked at Lena. You understand what you're alleging here, Miss Carter? That your uncle committed arson and attempted murder? Yes, sir. I was there. I saw it. And you're prepared to testify to that under oath? Yes, sir. Wilson signed the warrant. Sheriff Cross, you're authorized to arrest Martin Carter and any accomplices on charges of arson and attempted murder. Bail is set at $5,000 per defendant. $5,000. Martin didn't have that kind of money. He'd burned through everything stealing from the estate, which meant if Cross arrested him, he'd stay in jail until trial. Cross rode out that afternoon with 4 deputies. Lena wanted to go with them, but Brennan talked her out of it. You need to stay here and stay visible, Brennan said. Let the law handle Martin while you handle the civil side. Trust me, this is how we win. So Lena stayed in Bridger's Point and tried not to go crazy with waiting. Cole stayed with her, the two of them taking a room at a boarding house and trying to figure out what came next. Even if Cross arrests Martin, that doesn't fix the ranch, Lena said that night. They were sitting in the boarding house dining room, picking at a dinner neither of them had much appetite for. The barn's gone, the house is half destroyed, and we've got no money left to rebuild. You've got the money from the cattle sale, which I need to pay down debts and buy feed and supplies for winter. If I spend it on rebuilding, we won't make it to spring. Lena pushed her plate away. I don't know how to do this, Cole. Even if Martin goes to jail, even if I get the ranch clear and free, I don't know if I can save it. Cole was quiet for a moment. Then maybe you don't save it alone. What do you mean? I mean, you've been carrying this by yourself for too long. Your father's dream, your mother's memory, the weight of keeping everything together. But you don't have to do it alone anymore. He met her eyes across the table. You've got people willing to help. Thomas and his crew proved that. I'm proving that. You just have to let us. I can't ask people to risk their future on mine. You're not asking. We're offering. Cole reached across the table and took her hand. I'm offering. Let me help you rebuild, not as hired help, not as someone passing through, as a partner. Lena's breath caught. Cole? I know it's fast. I know we haven't known each other that long, but I've seen enough to know what you're made of, and I want to be part of what you're building. His grip on her hand tightened. Let me stand beside you, not behind you, not in front of you, beside you. There were a dozen reasons to say no. She barely knew him. She'd just gotten free of one man trying to control her life. Taking on another, even a good one, felt dangerous. And what if it didn't work out? What if he left, or they fought, or she failed and dragged him down with her? But looking at Cole across that table, at the steady certainty in his eyes, Lena realized something. She'd spent 6 years afraid to trust anyone, afraid to let anyone close because closeness meant vulnerability and vulnerability meant pain. But Cole had already stood by her through the worst of it, had already proven he wouldn't run when things got hard. Maybe it was time to stop being afraid. All right, she said quietly. Partners. Cole's face broke into a smile, the first real smile she'd seen from him, and something warm unfurled in Lena's chest. Hope, maybe, or possibility, or something even better than both. Sheriff Cross came back 3 days later with Martin and 4 of his hired men in custody. The 5th man had run when he saw the posse coming and was still out there somewhere, but Cross wasn't worried about him. The 4 we got are singing like canaries, Cross told Lena when she went to see him. Trying to cut deals, blame everything on Martin. Between their testimony and yours, we've got him dead to rights. When's the trial? Judge Wilson set it for February. Gives both sides time to prepare. Cross leaned back in his chair. Your lawyer's already filed about a dozen other motions against him. Civil suit, competency hearing, injunction to prevent him from claiming any interest in your property. She's thorough, I'll give her that. She's worth every penny I paid her. Speaking of which, Cross pulled out an envelope and handed it to her.
This came for you, from the Western Stockmen's Association. Lena opened it and found a letter from Harrison Price and a bank draft for $500. What's this? She asked. Cross shrugged. Says in the letter, Price heard about your barn burning down. Figured you could use some help rebuilding. He's also offering to buy your cattle again next year, same terms. Lena read the letter twice, her throat tight. Price had written that he respected people who kept fighting when the world knocked them down, and that the stockman's business was built on people like her. The money was a loan if she wanted it, or a gift if she didn't. I can't accept this, she said. Why not? I don't take charity. It's not charity, it's business. Price invests in people he thinks will succeed. Apparently he thinks you will. Cross stood and walked her to the door. Take the money, Miss Carter. Pride's good for keeping your spine straight, but it's lousy for rebuilding barns. Lena walked back to the boarding house in a daze. $500. Combined with what she had left from the cattle sale, it might actually be enough to get through the winter and start repairs in the spring. She found Cole in their room, going through a stack of newspapers looking for advertisements for building materials. When she showed him the letter and the bank draft, his reaction was simpler than hers. Take it, he said. Don't overthink it. But if I fail, then you fail having tried. But you're not going to fail. Cole set down the newspaper. I've been thinking about the rebuild. We don't need to replace the barn exactly as it was. We can do something smaller, more efficient, focus on what we actually need instead of trying to restore what was lost. My father built that barn. I know. But he's gone, and you're here, and you get to decide what comes next. Cole's voice was gentle. That doesn't mean forgetting him. It means building something that works for you. He was right. Lena had been so focused on preserving her father's legacy that she hadn't stopped to think about what she actually needed. A smaller barn would be cheaper to build and easier to maintain, and the money saved could go toward other things, hiring permanent help, buying better breeding stock, maybe even adding a proper hen house and a root cellar. All right, she said, we start fresh. Build what we need, not what was. They spent the next week planning. Brennan handled the legal battles, filing motions, preparing for the trial, making Martin's life as difficult as possible from behind bars. Lena and Cole focused on the practical side, drawing up plans for a new barn, pricing out materials, figuring out what supplies they'd need. Thomas sent a letter saying he and James would come back in the spring to help with the rebuild, and that they'd work for wages instead of percentage this time. Samuel sent word that he knew a good carpenter who'd work cheap if they could provide room and board. Even Miguel, the kid who'd ridden drag on the cattle drive, wrote to say he'd like a permanent position if Lena was hiring come spring. Slowly, piece by piece, a plan took shape. Not to restore what had been lost, but to build something new, something better. The trial came in late February. Lena sat in the courtroom and watched Martin shuffle in wearing prisoner's clothes and chains, looking smaller and older than she remembered. His lawyer was a public defender who looked overworked and underpaid, and Martin himself seemed to have given up. He barely responded to the charges, barely cross-examined witnesses, barely put up a defense at all. The jury took less than 2 hours to convict him on all counts. Judge Wilson sentenced him to 10 years in the territorial prison, and just like that, it was over. Martin was led away in chains without looking at Lena. She waited for some feeling, triumph, relief, satisfaction, but all she felt was tired and ready to move forward. Outside the courthouse, Brennan was waiting with more news. The competency hearing is scheduled for next week. With the criminal conviction, it should be straightforward. Once he's declared incompetent, his claim to your property is void permanently, not just until you're 25, permanently. And the debts? The judge ruled those are Martin's personal responsibility, not estate obligations. The creditors can pursue him if they want, but they can't touch your property. Brennan allowed herself a small smile. You won, Miss Carter, completely and totally. Lena should have felt elated, should have felt like celebrating. Instead, she just felt empty, like she'd been running for so long that now that she'd stopped, she didn't know what to do with herself. Cole seemed to understand. He didn't say anything as they rode back to Bridger's Point, just stayed close and let her process. That night, lying in bed at the boarding house, Lena finally let herself cry. Not for Martin, he'd earned every bit of what he got, but for everything she'd lost along the way. Her father, her childhood. 6 years of her life spent in fear and survival mode. The barn that had been her favorite place as a girl, where her father had taught her to ride and rope and do all the things that mattered on a ranch. Cole held her while she cried and didn't try to make it better. Just let her feel it, all of it, until there was nothing left and she fell asleep exhausted. They went back to the ranch in early March, when the snow finally started to melt and the first hints of spring showed in the greening grass. The place looked even worse in daylight than it had that night. The barn truly gone, just a black scar on the ground where it had stood, the house listing to one side with half its roof caved in. But standing there looking at it, Lena felt something shift. This was hers now. Truly, completely hers. No one could take it from her. No court, no creditor, no man claiming authority over her future. "Where do we start?" Cole asked. Lena looked around at the wreckage and then at the land beyond, rolling grassland stretching to the horizon, good water, good grazing. The foundation was still solid. Everything else could be rebuilt. "We start with the house," she said. "Make it livable first, then the barn, then everything else, one piece at a time." Thomas and James arrived in mid-March with a wagon load of lumber they'd bought cheap from a mill going out of business. Samuel came a week later with his carpenter friend, a quiet man named David who could look at a pile of boards and see a building. Miguel showed up in April asking if that job offer was still good. They worked through the spring and into summer. The house came first. New roof, reinforced walls, proper windows to replace the ones that had cracked in the fire. Then the barn, smaller than the original but better designed, with proper ventilation and a loft for hay storage. Then the corrals, the fences, a new well closer to the house. It was hard work, brutal some days. Lena had never been so tired in her life, falling into bed each night with muscles screaming and hands blistered. But it was honest work, building something instead of watching it crumble, and that made all the difference. Cole worked beside her every day, and something deepened between them that neither of them quite had words for. It wasn't just partnership, though it was that. It wasn't just friendship, though that too. It was something that grew in the spaces between, in the way he handed her tools without her asking, in the way she knew what he needed before he said it, in the quiet conversations they had in the evenings after everyone else had gone to sleep. One night in late June, sitting on the newly rebuilt porch watching the sunset, Cole asked the question Lena had been waiting for. "When this is done," he said, "when the ranch is rebuilt and running right, what then?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, do I stay as your partner, or do we make it something more?" Lena's heart kicked up. "What are you asking, Cole?" "I'm asking if you'd marry me, not because you need protection or because I'm trying to take over, but because I want to build a life with you, here on this land, as equals." Lena looked out at the ranch, at the new barn standing where the old one had been, at the house with its straight walls and solid roof, at the pastures where cattle grazed. She thought about the girl she'd been 6 months ago, beaten down and trapped and invisible. And then she thought about who she was now. Still scared sometimes, still figuring things out, but standing on her own 2 feet, fighting her own battles, making her own choices. "Yes," she said, "but not right away. I want to do this right. Court properly, take our time, make sure we're building something that'll last." She looked at Cole. "I spent 6 years having no control over my life. I'm not rushing into anything ever again, even the good things, especially the good things." Cole smiled. "That's fair. How long are we talking?" "A year maybe, long enough to be sure." "I can wait a year." He took her hand. "I can wait as long as you need." They were married the following spring in a small ceremony at the ranch. Sarah Brennan stood as witness, along with Thomas, James, Samuel, David, and Miguel, the crew that had helped rebuild not just the buildings, but Lena's belief that good people still existed in the world. There was no family on Lena's side. Her mother's relatives back east had never responded to the letters she'd sent. But she had Cole, and she had the people who'd chosen to stand beside her, and that was family enough. They spent their wedding night in the house Lena's father had built and she had reclaimed. And when she woke the next morning with Cole beside her and sunlight streaming through the window, Lena felt something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. The ranch grew over the next few years. They paid down the last of the debts by the end of the 2nd year, started turning a real profit by the 3rd. By the 5th year, they doubled their herd size and bought adjoining land from a neighbor who was retiring. Cole proved to be everything Lena needed in a partner: steady, smart, willing to work hard, and defer to her judgment on things she knew better. He never tried to take over or make decisions without her. They fought sometimes the way any two people working closely will fight, but they always worked it out. They had their first child in their 3rd year of marriage, a daughter they named Rose after Lena's mother. The second came 2 years later, a son they named Robert after her father. Watching Cole with the children, patient and gentle and fully present in a way Martin had never been, Lena understood what it meant to break a cycle. Thomas and James became permanent hands, bringing their families to live on the ranch. Samuel married a Shoshone woman named Mary and built a house on the eastern section of the property. Miguel grew into one of the best cattlemen in the territory and eventually took over as foreman when Thomas retired. The ranch became known not just for quality cattle, but for being a place that gave second chances. People who couldn't find work elsewhere, Chinese immigrants, mixed-race families, women who needed paying work, found it at the Carter Ranch. Some stayed, some moved on, but all of them were treated fairly and paid honestly. Sarah Brennan remained a friend and advisor, helping Lena navigate the legal and business side of ranching. She'd fought other cases like Lena's over the years, helping women escape abusive guardianships and reclaim their property. Seeing her work made Lena understand that her fight hadn't just been about saving one ranch. It had been about proving that the law could protect women if they were brave enough to use it. Martin served 8 years of his sentence before dying of pneumonia in prison. Lena got word of his death and felt nothing. No triumph, no grief, just a distant acknowledgement that a chapter of her life was finally, completely closed. She was 35 when she stood on the porch of her house, the porch she and Cole had built together, and looked out at the ranch. The barn was full of hay for winter. The corrals held healthy cattle. The fields were green with late summer grass. Smoke rose from the bunkhouse where the hands were settling in for the evening, and from the small houses scattered around the property where families lived and worked. Rose came running across the yard, her braids flying, followed more slowly by Robert, who was trying to carry a barn cat that clearly didn't want to be carried. Behind them, Cole emerged from the barn, his hair graying at the temples now, but his stride still strong. "Mama," Rose called. "Papa says we can ride out to check the north fence tomorrow. Can I bring Star?" "If you clean her tack tonight," Lena said. Rose ran off to the barn, already planning. Robert dropped the cat, who fled immediately, and followed his sister. Cole climbed the porch steps and settled beside Lena, the way he did most evenings. "Thinking deep thoughts?" he asked. "Thinking how far we've come." "We've come pretty far." Cole put an arm around her shoulders. "You've come farther." Lena leaned into him. "We did it together. You started it. I just helped finish." That wasn't entirely true, but Lena didn't argue. The truth was more complicated than either version. She'd found the courage to fight back, but Cole had given her the support to keep fighting. She'd had the legal right to the ranch, but it was the people around her, Cole, Thomas, Sarah, all of them, who'd helped her turn that right into reality. She'd learned something important through all of it, something she tried to teach Rose and Robert and every young person who came through the ranch looking for work or guidance. Freedom wasn't something someone gave you. It was something you took, often at great cost, and then defended every single day. And the strongest defense wasn't violence or anger. It was building something worth defending, building it well, with good people, on solid ground. The ranch she and Cole had built wasn't her father's ranch rebuilt. It was something new, something that belonged to both of them and to everyone who'd contributed to its success. It was bigger than one person's vision, stronger than one person's will. It was proof that starting over didn't mean erasing the past. It meant learning from it and building something better. "You ever regret it?" Cole asked quietly. "All the fighting? All the risk?" "No." Lena didn't hesitate. Even the worst parts were worth it, because they led to this. This was the ranch, yes. But it was also the family gathered around their dinner table each night, the hands who trusted her to treat them fairly, the neighbors who'd learned to respect a woman rancher, the children growing up knowing they had choices, had power over their own lives. It was freedom. Real freedom. Not the kind that came from running away or hiding, but the kind that came from standing your ground and building a life worth living on it. Rose came running back from the barn. "Mama, Star's tack is clean. Can we go now?" "Tomorrow, remember?" But tomorrow, when the light's good and we can see what we're doing. Rose sighed dramatically but didn't argue. She'd learned early that Lena didn't make decisions lightly, and once made, they stuck. That night, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Lena and Cole sat on the porch and watched the stars come out. The air smelled like hay and summer grass and the distant promise of rain. "You know what I think about sometimes?" Lena said. "That girl in the barn, the one Martin was about to beat, the one who didn't think she had any options." "What about her?" "I wish I could tell her it gets better, that fighting back is worth it, that she's stronger than she knows." Cole took her hand. "I think she figured it out. Eventually, but it would have been nice to know earlier." "Would you have believed it back then?" Lena thought about it. "Probably not. I had to live it to believe it." "Most people do." They sat in comfortable silence, the kind that came from years of knowing each other. Finally, Lena spoke again. "I want to tell you something I've never said out loud." "All right." "When I gave you that 10% of the cattle sale, I was terrified you'd take it and leave, that you'd decide the risk wasn't worth it, and I'd wake up one morning and you'd just be gone." Lena's voice was steady but quiet. "I'd learned not to trust people to stay, not to trust that anyone would choose me over easier options. And now? Now I know you're not going anywhere, but more than that, I know I'd be all right even if you did. I'd survive. I'd rebuild, because that's what I do now." Cole was quiet for a long moment. "I'm not going anywhere," he said finally. "But you're right. You would be all right. You're the strongest person I've ever met." "I'm not strong. I'm just stubborn." "Same thing, most of the time." Lena laughed. It was true. Stubbornness had carried her through the worst of it. Stubborn refusal to give up, to accept Martin's vision of who she was, to let fear win. She'd been terrified every step of the way, but she'd kept moving forward anyway. That was the thing nobody told you about courage. It wasn't the absence of fear. It was being afraid and doing it anyway. It was making the choice to fight even when you weren't sure you'd win. It was standing up one more time than you got knocked down. Years later, when Rose was 17 and facing her own struggles, a boy at school who wouldn't take no for an answer, a teacher who said girls shouldn't study mathematics, Lena would sit her down and tell her the whole story. Not the sanitized version, but the real one. The fear, the violence, the moments when giving up seemed like the only rational choice. "Why are you telling me this?" Rose would ask. "Because you need to know where you come from. Not just the good parts, the hard parts too. The parts where we didn't know if we'd make it, but we tried anyway." "Did you ever think you wouldn't make it?" "Every single day. But I kept going because the alternative was unacceptable. Living under Martin's control, watching him destroy everything my father built, I couldn't do it. Even dying trying to escape seemed better than that." "That's terrifying." "Yes, but it's also liberating. Once you decide there are things worse than death, you stop being controlled by fear of it." Rose would think about that for a long time. And years later, when she became the first woman lawyer in the territory and started taking cases like Sarah Brennan had, women fighting for their property rights, their custody rights, their basic human dignity, she would tell people that she learned to fight from her mother. But that was still years away. Tonight, sitting on the porch with Cole, Lena was just a woman looking at the life she'd built and feeling grateful for every hard-won piece of it. "Come to bed," Cole said eventually. "Morning comes early." It always does. But Lena stayed on the porch a few minutes longer after Cole went inside. She wanted to hold this moment, this peace, this certainty, this bone-deep knowledge that she'd won, not just against Martin, though she had, not just in court, though that too, but won in the way that mattered most. She'd taken back her power, her voice, her right to determine her own future, and she'd used that power to build something good, something that would outlast her. The ranch would go to Rose and Robert someday, and they'd run it their own way, make their own changes. And that was how it should be, each generation building on what came before but making it their own. That was legacy, not preserving the past in amber, but using it as foundation for the future. Lena stood and took one last look at the ranch, hers and Cole's, and everyone who'd helped build it, and then went inside. Tomorrow there would be fences to mend and cattle to move and a dozen other tasks that made up the daily rhythm of ranch life. There would be problems to solve and decisions to make, and hard work that never really ended. But tonight, she would sleep in a house she owned, beside a man she'd chosen, with her children safe down the hall and her future entirely in her own hands. And that was everything. The story of how Lena Carter became Elena Ryder, how she fought her way from victim to survivor to victor, wasn't just her story. It was the story of anyone who'd ever been trapped and found the courage to break free. Anyone who'd been told they were powerless and proved otherwise. Anyone who'd stared down fear and decided they were stronger. She hadn't done it perfectly. She'd made mistakes, trusted the wrong people sometimes, been afraid more often than she was brave. But she'd kept going, kept fighting, kept believing that tomorrow could be better than today if she was willing to work for it. And in the end, that was the only lesson that mattered. Not that life was fair. It wasn't. Not that good always triumphed. It didn't. But that you had more power than you thought, more strength than you knew, and more right to fight for your future than anyone could take away. You just had to be brave enough to use it.